Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on, on the recent content and all that stuff. So, with the first round of the playoffs, continuing, we will be recapping and giving our thoughts on all the games that have transpired since the last episode. In addition to that, we'll also be looking a little bit ahead, making some predictions, obviously, within the round as well. As a reminder, we do read our comments on any of our videos, and the one we have chosen today is from the Homelander, one of our subs, and he said, "Thanks for the shout out. It is refreshing to listen to smaller creators like yourselves versus the mainstream NBA media figureheads come playoffs. You will always have my support!" Exclamation point.
We always appreciate, the people who subscribe to our channel and
Yeah, for
always
sure.
shout him out in the live streams too, because he always shows up and always gives some really insightful, commentary and thoughts, and really makes the live stream right.
Yeah.
Because I know we have multiple people in the live streams, but he's always like the one that's commenting. Even like before the live stream starts and like in the middle of
Yeah.
it, like so we really appreciate that.
Yeah, he carries for sure. Reminder, if you do want your comment read just like that, just simply comment. That's all that we ask. And before we get started with today's episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so we got a bunch of games to go through. So, we'll go through them, from Monday onward. So we had 3 games on that Monday, right? We had Cavs Magic, we had Knicks Sixers, and Lakers Nuggets games 2, I guess, right?
Yes.
So we'll go into Cavs Magic. Not a whole lot really to describe here. It was 96-86 Cavs Magic. Kind of a similar script, I guess, to similar to game 1, just, Cleveland didn't score quite as much, right? And through the first couple of games, and obviously the Magic won the third game. We'll get into that one, but through the first few games, right? It just made sense, right? Like the Cavs are at home, right? They were the better offensive team of the two. You got an inefficient-ish game from Donovan Mitchell, right? But when you look over at the other side, for Orlando, and you see like 5 for 17 from Franz Wagner. Paolo was 9 for 20, which is fine. 1 for 7 from Jonathan Isaac, 2 of 5 from Jalen Suggs. He got hurt in the game, and came back, but he did come back later, and still played 30 minutes, and he played in the next game. So good that he's not, banged up.
Yeah.
And then you still got, goose eggs from Markelle Fultz, and Cole Anthony, right? They didn't really do anything. I guess Fultz made a free throw, so he had 1 point, but
Yeah.
still. Mo Wagner, right? Being a solid backup big, but it's just kind of rough when you had Carter, and Wagner, as I guess your second unit bigs or whatever, right? Because it's just kind of a weird mix. The 2 bigs, for Cleveland, kind of like once again badly outplayed the Magic front court. I guess other than Paolo, right? Mobley at 17 and 7 rebounds, Jared Allen at 16 and 20 rebounds, with 2 steals, 3 blocks. Garland was fine. So that, again, it was a low scoring game, but, the Cavs were in control for, the vast majority of the game. The Magic would make some runs and kind of get back in, but the offense, again, and through the first 2 games on the road, was really what killed them for the most part. Because they would get stops, because, again, it's not like the Cavs scored a ton either. But they just, kind of like the first game, couldn't really turn the defense into offense. But then the Cavs, in their half-court offense was just a little bit better than the Magic through the first couple of games. And again, like Donovan Mitchell through the first 2 games had been the best player on the floor as well.
Yeah, and the trend with the playoffs, honestly, and we'll get into this as the games go on, of course. Role players, they really have to show up on these road games, and that's kind of been the problem with the Orlando Magic and other teams as well. Just not to single them out, but if you look at this game, I think, Paolo, he has to be the best player on the court for the Magic to probably win this series, which is kind of a lot to ask, I think, especially when you have Donovan Mitchell and potentially Darius Garland on the opposing end. And, the other problem, obviously, is the guard play. I think, when you look at Cleveland, the guard room is, leagues above, the Magic at this point. And also the Magic's defense has to be very consistent as well. So a lot of things kind of have to tip in the Orlando's favor. But, overall, like you said, there's not too much to say about this, because even like looking at Donovan Mitchell from 3-point percentage, it was kind of rough, but, you kind of just take what's given to you. But he shot 9 for 22, 2 for 10 from the 3-point line, 23 points, obviously the big dub. But this is kind of why I favored Orlando in the first place, because even then, like, it's still an ugly game. And I think, Orlando's defense did kind of show up, because you did see some of the efficiency from a lot of the guys kind of go down, whether it be Strus, Garland, even Evan Mobley. Like, he didn't really shoot that well from three, he shot 25%. But like I said, or Cleveland, they came away with the win, and that's all that you can really ask for. But, we'll talk about the next game a little later.
Okay, so just to make sure, so you want to go from Monday games and then just go forward, as opposed to like,
I was just
as
saying,
opposed to like,
I was
as
just
opposed to
saying,
like,
I was just saying we could like just go forward, but it doesn't matter.
okay, I didn't know what you wanted to do.
It's fine. I'm cool with anything.
All right, so then we'll just go to the Knicks Sixers one.
Yeah.
Okay, Knicks Sixers, game 2, right? This was a game that was, the Monday night games were, very good. Both down to the wire, both very competitive. And the Sixers, they lost 101-104. Had a glitch in the system, to be honest, right? Because,
Yeah.
for decent chunks of the game, right, it was pretty back and forth. Embiid, right, he, had a better game than in game 1, right? He had 34, 10, and 6. But you really got a big game from Tyrese Maxey. And that was, kind of what allowed them to stay in the game. But then something happened, right? With 30 seconds to go in the game, right? Jalen Brunson, who had struggled all game. I mean, he shot 8 for 29 in game 2,
Mhm.
right? Which is not really any better than game 1. That's 28% from the field.
Sure.
But he hit a 3 in the corner, right? And it kind of bounced around and rolled in, and that got it, to a 2-point game or whatever. And then the Sixers failed to get the ball inbounds, right? They got it in, and then Maxey, he fell on the ground and then basically threw it away, gave it away. And then that led to a DiVincenzo 3. He missed the shot. Hartenstein got the offensive board. Then he kicked it back out to Anunoby, and then he swung it out to DiVincenzo again, and then this time he nailed the 3 to put him up. So really, it was a game that the Knicks kind of stole. I know at the end of the game, I know Embiid, he mentioned that he thought that there should have been a foul called, and then the last 2-minute review, they basically said, yeah, there should have been a foul called, or worst case scenario, Philly should have been awarded the timeout, right? Because they didn't, because they were, I guess they were trying to call a timeout, and they didn't get it.
Yeah.
It's the playoffs, so you just kind of know, like, in a playoff game, you're not always going to get the best whistle
Yeah.
anyways, right? And it's also just like, it was a meltdown. I mean, like, I understand that, like, yeah, there were some bad calls, but it was also a meltdown at the same time. So it's kind of rough, but, for the Knicks, obviously, you go up 2-0. And you protect home court, which was kind of the theme that we saw for most of these first rounds. For the most part, is that most of the teams were able to defend home court. Obviously, there were some that didn't, and we'll get into those as we go. But yeah, obviously for the Knicks, again, it's tough because Embiid, even not at 100%, is still good. So it's like he has a chance to kind of still win them games, just off of his play. And then if you get him and Maxey playing together at a high level, then they're probably the better team. So if you're the Knicks, you really have to get performances out of everybody because again, Brunson struggled for the most part in this series, and the Sixers have been guarding him pretty well, right? So it's not like it's stuff that isn't sustainable or anything. Obviously, he can make tough shots, but if you're the Knicks, you just need to get so much more out of your role players. But you got them at home, so we'll see where the rest of this series goes. But they did get the first 2 in New York.
Yeah, I hated this game for Philly. If you want me to be honest, I think the entire roster, but Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, pretty much did not show up. And I think that's kind of a recipe for disaster. I think if you're looking at Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey to kind of carry you all the way, without really any support on either end of the floor, I think that is not the recipe that you're looking for. All things considered, I think they do a great job defensively against Jalen Brunson, like you were talking about. But the problem is, Jalen Brunson's not a guy that's going to, just fold under the pressure. I think, he can find guys. He can get the ball to them. In this game, he only had 1 turnover while pretty much getting blitzed for every minute of the game. And then you know it all goes back to what I was saying about game one, where we're talking about Josh Hart and DiVincenzo. Why are these guys wide open? No closeouts, and I get it. Sometimes they do take and make some tough shots, but at the end of the day, I think DiVincenzo having an opportunity to close the game twice is a very bad meltdown, foul or not. And I do agree, the officiating was kind of wonky. I do agree with Embiid, but I don't think you can really use that as an excuse to kind of just skate past the fact that you guys sold the game very badly. That inbounds play should have never even happened, in my opinion. Nick Nurse should have called the timeout prior to that, or whatever the case may be. Be a little bit more vocal, something. I think there's a way that you can kind of mitigate brain farts like that. But regardless, you got to get the O board. Even in that situation, you have to, or D board, excuse me. You need to get the rebound. You need to rebound. You can't have Hartenstein get the rebound, as great of a rebounder as he is. You can't allow them to get two chances to win the game, and that's exactly what happened.
The tough part is that the Knicks do get a lot of offensive rebounds because they have a lot of really good rebounders, but they're also a physical team that plays hard, and that's the tough part where it's like they could be down in a game, but they're never out.
Yeah.
Right? They're not going to quit. Even if they get beat. And so like if you're Philly, you can't really let up, on this Knicks team unless you got like a double-digit lead,
Right.
with a couple minutes to go and the game's basically over because they're gonna fight to the end.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing is that like when you're undermanned, kind of that's what you have to do in order to beat, a team like Philly that again, if Embiid is 100%, is better than the Knicks to be honest, or at least their best player is better. But then, like you said, the role players also have to show up, right? Like Tobias Harris has been pretty stinky, for the most part in this series. Yeah, I mean, Buddy Hield, I think has, his value is pretty much just plummeted for the most part, right? They gave up very little to get him, and you can kind of see that, like, it makes sense why.
100%.
Which is just wild, right? Because he was a good, valuable player for the most part, but he just seems like in the postseason, it just seems like he just is. I don't even know if it's scared or just nerves. He just looks lost.
Sure.
And maybe it becomes easier, if Embiid is 100%, but it still can't be all on Embiid, right? Like I mean, Buddy Hield 0 for 2 from 3. It's not like every shot he's taken is a horrible shot. Like you still got to compete defensively. So I don't know. It's a tough spot to be in. It doesn't mean obviously that the Sixers can't win the series. It's just again, you still have to steal one in New York if you want to win. And if the role players don't play well on the road, then unless you have a Herculean game by Embiid and Maxey, I mean like you probably just are kind of cooked if you can't get it done in New York. So if it gets to a game 7 in New York, I mean we don't know what's going to happen. So I mean,
and the Garden is a real factor, and we talked about that last episode.
Yeah, you almost always give the edge to the home team in Game 7, just because, like you said, the crowd's a factor, and if the game gets going and they start playing well early, the crowd's going to go berserk.
Yeah, and like the problem that I have with the Knicks, like, or not really even the Knicks, it's more so of an observation. Like they don't even have like a solid number 2, and I think that's why Brunson's really struggling because all the attention is really on him. But all the role players together collectively, they're playing amazing team basketball. I think, especially to close and go down the stretch. But then like I said, they don't have the number 2 because obviously Julius Randle's hurt, and I think that's going to be the problem if they do advance.
Yeah. If they lose the series, it's going to be because, or if they lose the series, or if they don't make a deep run, it's going to be because not having Randle, like you said, just removes a second creator. Even though we know in the playoffs he's usually a lesser version of himself, it's still better to have that option than to just not have it at all.
Yeah.
Just because it makes things easier for everyone else. I mean, you're basically asking like Miles McBride, off the bench to be, your only other real ball handler, I guess, and he's not even, like playing like the role of like a traditional point guard.
Right.
It's more like a 3-and-D role, and then you have Hart, and Hartenstein, kind of running some offensive sets as well, and like Hart shooting threes. Well, that's kind of another factor that's helped New York because I don't think in last year's playoffs he shot the 3 that well, and it kind of got to a point where he started to kind of not really take threes a whole lot.
Yep.
And even in the regular season, I don't think he shot that amazing, but in the playoffs, he shot a really high percentage, and sometimes stuff like that can swing a series, especially at home.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so then we move on. Game 2, Lakers Nuggets, right? That was the other crazy one, right? Where it was a game that initially looked kind of wild, right? In the first half, right? The Lakers were taking it to the Nuggets. They were up
Hmm.
15 at halftime, up 20 in the third quarter, and then managed to basically whittle, then Denver kind of over the course of the second half chipped and chipped away. Right, it wasn't like they turned a 20-point lead into like a 2-point lead in like a couple minutes, like in game one. But over the course of the game, they just whittled it down, whittled it down, whittled it down, and then it got to the last possession, right, where LeBron misses a three, and then Jamal Murray gets the ball and then hits the step back or whatever over AD, and then it's a game winner, right? So, and that's the tough part against this Nuggets team, where it's like if it's crunch time, no lead is safe, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're up, because it's like you're probably offensively not going to be able to trade baskets because they're able to generate offense better than pretty much any team late in the game. And then defensively, right? It's tough to get stops, right? Because they have two guys that are really good at making tough shots. Because in the fourth quarter, right? I mean, Murray was bad for most of the game. But then in the fourth quarter, right, I think he went like what, 6 for 8 or 7 for 8 or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
And like, it wasn't like all of those were wide open. Like, it was a lot of the type of shots he was missing through the first three quarters. And then they eventually went down. Really, right? Like, for most of that game, it was kind of the other guys that were kind of like keeping Denver in the game in the second half, right? Like, KCP only had 6, but he had a momentum play where he got a steal and a fast break dunk,
Hmm.
right? Jokic had what, 27, 20 and 10. Aaron Gordon at 14 and 7. Michael Porter Jr. right at 22 and 9, right? And he hit that big three where it was like LeBron got a transition steal and a dunk, put him
On
up
the right
by three.
elbow.
Yeah, yeah, and then what was it? Jokic threw up some wild shot. I think he was trying to draw a foul.
Yeah.
And they didn't call it, rightfully so, because it wasn't going to be a foul. And then Aaron Gordon got, I guess, the offensive rebound, loose ball, whatever you want to call it, kicked it back out to MPJ, who hit like a contested, fadeaway three to tie the game. And that's when you knew, they're probably going to win this game.
Yeah.
Because then obviously, for the Lakers, I know a lot has been made about, like in the second half, like, right, like they stopped running offense or whatever. And you give credit to the Nuggets because defensively they made adjustments, right? They took Jokic off of AD and put him on Rui, right? Because AD, for a good chunk of the game, pretty much was scoring every trip down, right? It was
Yeah.
basically like,
For three
simple offense.
quarters.
Yeah, give him the ball, with his back to the basket, then have him turn and face or do whatever he needs to do. I think he made what, 13, 14 straight shots.
Yeah.
And then they put Gordon on him and they put Rui, and then they put Jokic on Rui, and that kind of took away, the pick and roll game. So then in the fourth quarter, right, because for most of the game, LeBron kind of spent a decent amount of time not really taking a lot of shots. He did miss some layups, but he was kind of saving himself for the fourth quarter. And he did have other than the missed three, right, he did have a good fourth quarter. I mean, I think he played well enough in the fourth in terms of the shot making for them to win. Just you needed one more guy. You even got a good D'Lo game for the most part. I know he kind of faded away in the second half. Like like that kind of game is good enough,
Yeah.
right? But then you got a really bad game from Rui, right? Like he's not been good in this series at all. I mean, he's probably missed like at least like 3, 4 layups at the rim like every game. I
Hmm.
mean, which is just kind of nuts because those were shots that were kind of automatic for him in the regular season and even in last year's playoffs, right? They were pretty much automatic, but for whatever reason, he just has been awful, in this series. And like you can kind of get away with, because like defensively, he's not going to be able to guard Jokic or Michael Porter Jr. Because Jokic is too big, and then Michael Porter Jr. is a guy that moves around on the perimeter, and that's not his game defensively. But you can kind of live with it, if you kind of match the offensive output, right? Like if you're getting like 15 from him, that's probably enough, right? In a game you lost by 2, he was 1 for 7. If he makes like if any of them make like 1 or 2 shots, you can probably put the game away. But you know that second half performance by the Nuggets is why we think that they're probably going to win the title because if they can get it to a close game, they're probably going to beat you. And again, people talk about the offense, but even the defense is really good. I mean, again, Aaron Gordon and KCP have kind of changed that team's life in terms of the defense because you have a guy in KCP that can, navigate through screens and kind of make life tough for a lot of ball handlers. You have Aaron Gordon, who's big enough that he can kind of bother guys like a LeBron or even an AD. He can crash the offensive glass because that's the other thing, right? For the Lakers is that the second units, the bench has been awful, right? Like for most of the series, it was what I think just Torian Prince that really was able to really do anything off the bench, right?
Yeah, he was the only one who scored off the bench, actually.
Right, like, and that's kind of the tough part is that, like, that's supposed to be if you're the Lakers where you have the advantage because we've talked about for the Nuggets, that's kind of the weakness of the team is that they don't really have a whole lot of depth, right? It's mainly their starters that kind of carry most of their team, on both ends of the floor. But if you can't really win, the minutes with the second unit, you're probably going to lose the game, right? And the Nuggets were able to stay in during the minutes where Jokic was off the floor because they would be able to get up and down and defend and then score in transition and then get offensive rebounds because the Lakers, don't really have like an additional big that you can put out there, which we talked about like in the offseason was a problem for them, where they're gonna give up a lot of rebounds, they're not gonna get offensive rebounds other than AD. And that's pretty brutal, right? Because for a good chunk of the game, they played it. You got pretty much almost everything you needed because you got a good D'Angelo Russell game. Because, like I said, I know in the second half he didn't do a whole lot, but they didn't even really play through him a whole lot either. I mean, I think some of the adjustments, or I guess lack of adjustments, right? Like, there was a stretch in the fourth where they were struggling to score, and he wasn't even in the game. I think he played less minutes in this game than in game one,
Yeah.
when he was way better in this game than the first game, right? He played just under 39 minutes. None of the starters played 40. For LeBron, you could tell he was gassed. I mean, he had a stretch, I think, in the second where he just sat, he had to come out. But I don't know, just when your bench has been so unproductive, it's kind of hard to play, guys, that aren't really giving you anything. I mean, like they had lineups that I don't think, I've ever seen them run before. And I've watched pretty much every game, right? They would have like Spencer and Gabe Vincent out there, with other guys, and it just didn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, again, that's the problem. When you're playing a better team, you kind of have to win on the margins. Turnovers and offensive rebounds have killed them too, right? Where it's like you're going to turn the ball over a ton and give up a ton of offensive boards. Even when they don't play well, they're going to get a ton of shots. And if they get 20 more shots than you, then they're still probably going to win, right? Because it's like, even through the first two games, like it's not like they, because the Stars have played pretty close, right? Like last year, I think you could say LeBron and AD got pretty badly outplayed, by Jokic and Murray, right? Like they weren't 100%, but either way, that was kind of the difference. This time around, you've gotten pretty much enough from your main guys right through those first two games, but then you look around, and then it's like again, Rui 3 points, 1 for 7. Like you said, nobody off the bench other than Torian Prince, scored, and then to lose at the buzzer, that's pretty demoralizing, right? Especially again, it looked like they may be able to pull off an upset in Denver, and that's what you have to do if you're going to try to win the series. Is you'd like to split the first two games, but they couldn't, and that's pretty much the series right there.
Yeah. Shout out to Jamal Murray. What a bucket. The confidence, I think you have to love it because, for him to go 9 for 24 from the field in total,
Almost.
exactly, and still, finish with the game winner. I think that's amazing. That shows how much confidence he has, and also the amount of confidence that the Nuggets have in him as a closer. And I think that's been solidified for sure. Like you said, Jokic I think has been the best player on the floor in this series so far, in tandem with Anthony Davis. I do want to give AD his flowers as well because I think he's done a lot offensively and defensively, which is why these games are so close. The problem is like when you look at LeBron and Jamal Murray, I don't want to say it's even. I think LeBron has the clear edge here. But then, going down the list is where it gets really, really rough. Because I think if you look at Rui compared to, Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., Caldwell Pope, I think all three of those guys are pretty much outplaying D'Lo, Hachimura, and Reeves, which is a huge issue. And I think that's what could potentially lead to this being a potential sweep. But, in this game, I was very baffled by a lot of things. First of all, from Denver's perspective, wild to leave D'Lo that open, but I do understand, the thought process because he hadn't played well, especially, with the past couple seasons, and then obviously regular season wasn't looking too good. It's not a good matchup for the guy, but he did show up, I guess, 7 for 11 from threes. It's a good game, but like you said, didn't really do much to close. But like I said, that's kind of an interesting philosophy, and I think that's part of the reason why this game was so close was because they were kind of giving him looks. But eventually they did step up, and he was starting to hit the wild ones, which is where D'Lo is valuable at times, but also horrible. And then, I don't understand the philosophy still of leaving guys like Michael Porter Jr. This is from the Lakers' perspective, wide open. I just don't think that's cool. You know.
Yeah, I think that's Rui because it's just like if he's not on Jokic, that's probably the guy he's
Yeah,
guarding.
because it seems like they try and do this interesting thing too. It even happened in Game 3, which we'll get to. But like when Rui's not on Michael Porter Jr., I think it's odd that they try and put D'Lo on him. One of probably the worst people that you could possibly put on a guy that is quite literally immune to closeouts at times. So that's obviously awkward as well. So I kind of want to put coaching into play here because I think Darvin Ham has been abysmal. I don't know what these meltdowns are, and I get it. That it might not even really be meltdowns. It might just be that Denver is better than you in the fourth and third. But my God, it's really tough to watch sometimes because I think there's a clear lapse in judgment about who you should have, what you should be scheming. And I get it. You can't go to a guy for all 4 quarters. I think that would be too much to ask of AD. So I kind of give him a pass for that. I even give LeBron a pass. Like, you can't expect him to make every single three. He shot 50% from 3 the entire game. You can't expect him to just knock down everything. Also, officiating was kind of funky this game as well. Not to the degree to the point where I think you need to be calling it out in a post-game press conference. Yeah,
that's why I didn't really bring it up.
Yeah, I don't think it got to that point. Because I think there were calls that were missed on both ends, and obviously calls that were granted on both ends of the floor for both of these teams, where it's like, okay, I guess we can call that a foul, or I guess we're not. Overall, very odd game, but way to close it for Denver, and it's a tone setter, and kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the episode, where it's on the role players to really play well at home and away, and I think that's going to be the problem with the Lakers as well. Like, you look at it, like you said, Taurean Prince in 22 minutes only had 6 points. That's fine, but he's the only guy off the bench to score in this entire game, and that can't happen, compared to Denver and what they were able to do.
Yeah, like Taurean Prince can't be better than Rui in a playoff series.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because that's the guy that started, for Rui earlier in the season, and it wasn't working.
Right.
Now you're starting the right guy, but then he's not playing well, and it's kind of hard because if he's not playing well, it's kind of hard to just put him out there if you can't do anything on both ends. But then if you don't play him at all and you put in somebody else, you're putting in somebody who's just not as good. That's probably just going to make it worse anyway. So there's no real easy answers for the guys if they're not playing well, and that's also kind of the sign that you're playing a better team, but you have to win on the margins if you're matching up against a better team, and they haven't. Like with the officiating thing, the thing that I did disagree with, when they mentioned the marginal contact in terms of what was it? It was after he got hit in the face after.
Okay.
Is saying when a guy gets fouled on a jump shot and the guy foot, under the shooter, right? It doesn't have to be while the guy is shooting. That's after the ball is out of his hands.
Sure.
And it's still, flagrant. Again, we both agree that doesn't really change the course of the game that much. I mean, I guess it's a 2-point game, so maybe it does, but also
it's not the reason you blew a 20-point lead.
Yeah, exactly.
We didn't even talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. You probably also just shouldn't blow a 20, because that's not really an easy thing to do.
No.
I mean, usually in the playoffs, because it's played at a slower pace, there's look around at the scoring. It's all, a much lower. It's kind of hard, I mean, obviously you gotta, it's hard to, build up a big lead as it is, right? And it's even harder to blow a big lead because again, just, playing slower is just usually what teams do. But the problem is if you're going to play slow, then that means that you have to, you can't come up empty, for long stretches, which is rough because then it doesn't really do anybody any good. Because then if you play slow and you come up empty, the other team gets a free run out and they get to score, immediately.
Which is what happens with Denver.
Right, exactly. And it's that's where the discipline comes into play as well, right? Where it's I think AD after the game mentioned, there are stretches where we don't know what we're doing on both ends of the floor, which is a wild quote to hear in the middle of a playoff series. But, then it's you watch the Lakers offense compared to the Nuggets offense, and it's you're never going to see Aaron Gordon take a contested step back 3 in the middle of the offense, right? See it with a guy like a Taurean Prince, but you're not going to see that with Aaron Gordon, right? You're not going to see, KCP going one-on-one, trying to take a guy off the it just doesn't happen, right?
It seems like they have defined roles.
Yeah, and you're never going to see a stretch where Jokic or Jamal Murray don't touch the ball and get one shot attempt in the fourth. It's never going to happen. It just isn't.
Sure.
Because it's like, when we talk about, because I know there's people that cover the Lakers and talk about the freelancing versus, organized offense or whatever. And it's like there's a lot of teams that will freelance, right? Like when you watch Dallas, and we'll get into them, right? Like they'll do a lot of freelancing late
Heck
in the
yeah.
game. Yeah, but like that's like at the end of the games, you usually just give the ball to your best players and just kind of let them do what they want.
Yeah.
It's just, again, like there are just stretches where like just it doesn't make a lot of sense. And again, it's like you said, it's a combination of coaching and personnel and guys not playing well, and that's what's going to lead to them probably getting bounced out
Yeah.
pretty quickly.
And it's like
Um,
for through these both of these like games, game 1 and game 2, I feel like this hasn't even really felt like a first round matchup. It feels more like a later one in terms of
and,
like how competitive these two teams really are at the end of the day.
and yeah, and then it's wild because you don't even feel like the Nuggets played that amazing,
No.
through either of the first two games. Like they can probably play better. And then if they do, right, that's when you're really in trouble because that's the part if you're the Lakers where it's like we've played pretty well, you know, for 3 quarters, essentially of each game, and then in the fourth, everything. I mean, the third quarter in the first game, everything fell apart. But game two was even worse because you had a huge lead. They never were up by 20 in game one.
Yeah.
And they were up by, and the big lead they had was in the second quarter, right? It's one thing to blow a 12-point lead in the second. It's another thing to blow a 20-point lead, in the third, right? Because there's not as much time, to be able to blow a big lead like that. But, it just kind of goes to show, the differences between those two teams. And that's why we talked about it's a tough matchup. When you've lost to a team 10 straight times or 10,000 times or however many times it is, right? Like they may not win another game until Jokic retires. But like when
Literally.
something like that happens, I mean, like it's pretty clear you just don't match up great against that team, but you still have to win on the margins. But it
Yeah.
doesn't seem like they're going to be able to.
Mhm.
Then moving on, uh, you know, I guess this were the Tuesday games, right? Suns Wolves.
Oh boy.
This series has gone a little bit different than I think we both thought so
Hmm.
far.
Okay.
Still some series left, but 105-93 Minnesota. And it's kind of wild, right? Because going into the series, we both, we both picked the Suns, right? I don't know, you know, we don't normally make like a ton of series predictions. We did one for like the Lakers Nuggets, but we don't normally do like this team wins in like 5, 6, 7. It's
Yeah.
like I think this team is gonna win this series, and I feel pretty strongly about it, or I kind of lean one way, or 50-50. This one I was felt pretty good about the Suns winning the series because you look at the regular season matchup, they won 3 times, they blew them out twice in the span of a week right before the playoffs, right? So you kind of assumed that it would carry over, but it really hasn't, right? Minnesota, in terms of what they've been able to do in the postseason, it has transferred over a lot more, right? Like their
Mhm.
defense has
Mhm.
carried over. They, kind of shut down, the Suns' big three for the most part, right? Like, we haven't seen a game where all three of them play well at the same time. And in this game, all three of them played relatively poorly, for the most part. And you're just never going to win a game like that. And they won by 12. I mean, it was really like a 20-point game at one point. Like, the final score was kind of, was not indicative of how the game went, mainly in the
Yeah.
second half. Because in the first half, the Suns played pretty well, right? It looked like they made adjustments defensively. Devin Booker was playing better, right? So you felt good about that. You were getting more contributions from your second unit guys, but then they were still only up one at halftime. So you were like, okay, this is going to go one of two ways, right? Either, you know, they're going to probably pull it out and still win in a close game, or they're going to get blown out. Because then you look at the other end, and like Towns and Edwards really didn't get going at all in the first half, right? Like, Edwards made some great passes and playmaking and played great defense and played hard, but like Towns had 3 fouls in the first quarter, so didn't even really play much in the first half. And Edwards really didn't do anything in the first half other
Mm.
than pass. But like I said, he wasn't scoring. But then Jaden McDaniels ended up having 25, and instead of guarding Booker, he guarded KD in this game, for the most part, and pretty much kind of shut him out of the game. Mike Conley, right, had a huge game after kind of a, stinker in game one, right? He ended up having 18, 3 of 6 from three, 7 of 13. Nikhil Alexander Walker was good. Um, and then Gobert, right, was great, right? And that's, been kind of one of the differences is that like Gobert's been the best big on the floor by a lot. I mean, like Towns has been okay, but not really that great. And then, the Phoenix's bigs, it's not even close. Um, which is which is that's not ideal. If you're the other team because you got to have somebody. And like even Nurkic, his numbers don't look that bad, but he was not that good, right?
It's
Like
horrible,
defensively,
man.
defensively he was getting carved up. Um, he did have 14 rebounds, so you give him credit for that, but it hasn't worked. And like a lot of the problems that you kind of thought about, the Suns having in the regular season have kind of carried over through the first two games where it's like, okay, how do they organize their offense? How do they determine who's going to do what, and how are they going to defend? And that's kind of been an issue through these first two games where they're turning the ball over at a really bizarre rate. I mean, they had 19 turnovers in this game. They were like, and then there were stretches in the second half where it was just like one turnover after another. The Wolves have been the more physical team, so that's the other issue as well. It's just kind of wild. It's completely flipped from what I thought it was going to look like so far, in the series. And obviously, like it's not like the Suns can't come back and win. They still have two more games at home. We'll see what they do, but you still have to steal one in Minnesota. And it's rough, right? And then like Jaden McDaniels, he's an X factor we talked about because if he has, some bigger offensive performances, than what he was doing in the regular season where he was at like what 10, 11, 12 a game or whatever,
Hmm.
right? But if he gives you like almost 20, then it's like, I mean, there's not really a whole lot you can really do there. So for Phoenix, you're gonna have to find a way to get some better performances out of pretty much everybody, or you're going home pretty quickly. But again, they got to find a way to organize this offense because that's where it starts, right? Because you don't expect them to play amazing defense, and in the first half it was fine, but then like at a certain point when your offense just completely dies and just becomes incredibly putrid, it hurts you on both ends of the floor. Because like we talked about with the Lakers Nuggets, right? When the Lakers offense was bogged down, became stagnant, they couldn't score, they couldn't, then the other team can get out and run. Minnesota every single time they got to stop. They got out and ran. Like they would force turnovers, they crash the offensive glass and get extra possessions. And just force the Suns into some tough shots. And it's just rough, right? It's making the Suns look more like a regular season team. We'll see how they respond at home. But again, like they're gonna have to fight through some adversity because it's not looking great, right? Like they're jawing back and forth at guys, even though they're getting kind of whooped in these games. So again, they got to find a way to respond. Because obviously Game 3 is must win. Like all the teams down 2-0, right? Or else, because if they don't win Game 3, then that's a wrap. And then you're gonna have to have some very interesting questions about what you do with that team going forward. But we're not there yet.
Yeah, we're close though, but I'm not worried. If you want me to be honest, I know a lot of people are. They're taking this down 2-0 thing very seriously, as anybody should. But for me, I think if you look at Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, I don't think they're going to go like that in the first round. And I think this is more of a heavyweight matchup than anybody really expected. That's the surprise. I think people didn't expect Minnesota to come out fighting like this. And I think that even caught Phoenix, off guard as well. So I think this is going to be a heavyweight matchup. I think it's going to go down to probably game 7 at this point. And I'm going to probably say that Phoenix ties up the series. I know that's probably a bold prediction considering how well or how badly they've played. But it's very uncharacteristic, I think, of Devin Booker to play this badly. I think that's the main guy that I'm really looking at here, along with Kevin Durant. I think Beal is kind of like, yes, you want more out of him, but at the same time, like, what is his real ceiling? We don't really know. But I think Kevin Durant and Devin Booker have been the two underwhelming guys. And I think I do have to give a lot of credit to Jaden McDaniels because that Anthony Edwards quote is looking better, every single day where, he's basically negating any option that they have on offense. He's playing 41 minutes and Kevin Durant played 41 minutes. It's the same thing as last game, just not on Devin Booker, but on Kevin Durant this time. And you take him out the game, that's tough. And that might be the game plan that Minnesota's kind of throwing at them, where they're kind of just going to throw Jaden McDaniels on whoever potentially has the hot hand that game and just take them out. And that's going to be tough because at the same time, you got Gobert obviously anchoring down low. And then Conley, I think when he's on, that's also another threat as well. But the real guy I think to watch out for is McDaniels because he's kind of like MPJ where, if he's on, I think this team is very, very poised to make a deep run. The question is, are you going to get another 25-point game from Jaden McDaniels next time, especially in hostile territory? I doubt it. Could be completely wrong. He could come out there and drop 30. Who knows? But I think I'm expecting a huge retaliation from Booker and really Kevin Durant. I don't think they're going to go like that at home. But this game was horrible to watch, I think, from a Phoenix perspective, because you kind of felt okay in the first quarter, maybe even like a little bit in the second quarter.
Yeah.
But my God, the third, I don't know what's wrong with a lot of these teams, like coming out of the half, they just look completely different. And I guess that might just be playoffs and just how it is and just how, momentum shifts. But I mean, to lose a game, I think where Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns don't play that well alongside your guys, I think that kind of hurts the most. Where it's like this, you lost to Jaden McDaniels pretty much, on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, that's the part that would concern me is the fact that again, it was a game where, like you said, like I mentioned, right? Neither of the stars. I know what Edwards said that they're the best duo, but it was a game where neither of them played great offensively. And again, Towns barely even played. I mean, he played 23 minutes. In a game that the Wolves ran away with, because he was in foul trouble. He had 3 in the first quarter.
Yeah.
So, he was pretty much didn't really play at all. And like you said, they blew them out. And with McDaniels, he made some tough shots, but he also had 5 offensive boards. And he got a few of his baskets, by just crashing, the glass and getting those extra opportunities. And that's kind of where, Minnesota has been able to get away with like, okay, this offensive possession didn't necessarily work out, but we just got the offensive board and then we created an extra shot like the Nuggets, right? And that's the tough part when you're a team like the Suns. You got to be able to find a way to get some of those rebounds, but it's hard because I mean, you look at Minnesota's starting group and you got 3 7-footers basically out there together, in the starting 5.
Yeah.
And then you got, at small forward Grayson out, right? And then you have, Kevin Durant at 4, who's fine as a rebounder, right? But he's not going to be able to match up on the boards against all 3 of those guys. And then Nurkic, who is a good rebounder, but that's your only real center. Other than I guess Eubanks, who's a funny guy, I guess. So,
dude, I don't know what was going on with him. Like, credit to him. He did have a +9, plus minus or whatever, but there were kind of stretches where I was like, oh my God, that was bad. The layup I think was one of them. That was really bad. There were a couple actually. Smoked a couple of wide open ones.
Yeah, this is the guy that they lost a pick for. By the way, just kind of throwing that out there. But yeah, so we'll see what happens because Game 3, again, as we already know, is a must-win. If they don't show up in Game 3, then it's a wrap. And and again, there's a lot of pressure for that. Because again, these guys, have been in high-pressure games. We've seen Durant in high-pressure games. And we've seen Booker and I guess Beal to a lesser extent, right? All in high pressure games.
Sure.
But again, the 3 of them together, it just looks kind of bizarre. And I just really feel like they, it really was a mistake to not have somebody in that group that can really play the role of like just some type of organizer. Like even Minnesota has like a Mike Conley. I mean, you look around at all the other contenders, they have at least one guy, that's a relatively solid option at the point guard spot, right? Like, of all the, teams in the playoffs, like who's the worst, which team has the worst point guard, right? Like, I mean,
we could debate about that.
Right. Like, yeah, so exactly. Like, I mean, you go through, all the playoff teams and like, which team has the worst starting point guard, right? I mean, is it Orlando? I mean, is it, is it
probably be Orlando, man.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be Jalen Suggs, who's still something,
Yeah, he does a lot on the defensive end and shooting.
Yeah, I guess you look around, where else? Like D'Angelo Russell.
Yeah, I don't think he's the worst. It has been looking bad for him, though, but...
I'm not saying he's the worst. I'm just saying, like, if you look around at all the playoff teams...
Sure. You got Garland, you got Maxey, Brunson.
Brunson, Harden... I mean, Luka. I guess Tyler Hero, runs point guard.
Yeah, because Rozier.
Yeah, because no Rozier, CJ McCollum.
Halliburton.
Halliburton. I mean, like, I feel like Phoenix, like, probably has the worst point guard. I mean, and
it's been Book, right?
Yeah, but, like, he's not a point guard.
Right.
I know he can point guard, but that's not what he does best. I mean, I guess, you say, okay, like Jalen Suggs and D'Lo are obviously worse players.
Sure.
but I'm just saying that's kind of a rough fit. But
Yeah, because
again,
he's been
you
turning
never
the ball
know.
over like crazy, and just it's been bad, and it's crazy how things come full circle. That was our biggest concern about this team, was like, you don't have like a true playmaker, and that's probably
Right.
gonna hurt you come playoff time. And look where we are.
Right, even a guy like a Tyus Jones, like just to kind of, not as a starter, but like even if he plays like 20 minutes, like just to have somebody, anybody, that can kind of organize some stuff. I mean, again, their pathway to win is pretty much just hit, jump shots like crazy. I mean, that's kind of their pathway, to
Hmm.
win a game. You would think at home they'll probably have a better offensive performance, right? I think you would. That's kind of the hope, right? Win the two at Phoenix just by shooting well, or whatever, right? You hope that the role players for the Wolves don't play quite as well. Maybe you make adjustments or whatever. Then you go back to Minnesota for Game 5, and then
That's why I'm
see
not
if you.
like super worried. But
Right,
I
it's
do
just
understand the urgency though, because
yeah,
it is
it
wild.
is tough. Right, it is tough because when you're down 2-0, you have to win 4 out of 5. You gotta win at least 1 on the road, um, and that's the tough part, and then, for the Suns, like, it's also not the youngest team in the world, right? Like, even a guy like Durant, is, like, 35 or whatever, right? What if he kinda just has a game where he just kinda runs out of gas, just because he might be a little bit fatigued, and you don't have a guy that could even set him up for easy shots. I mean, we don't know. Again, like, 2-0 isn't ball game for any series. Like to be fair, we've seen like times where it's like, okay, if you lose this game, the series is probably done, right? Like we thought that the series for the Lakers and Nuggets was over when they lost game 2 at the buzzer, right? But like
Sure.
technically that it doesn't have to be the case. It's just like sometimes you can kind of feel like if you're in a game where it's like you have to win this game, right?
Right.
Like that's kind of what happens, right? Like obviously the Suns weren't in that position in the second half because they just got ran off the floor,
Hmm.
but I think that's kind of the hope that you have to have is that you protect home court and then try to get one in Minnesota. It just would always be nice to get one of the first two so that way, that takes a lot of pressure off where you can just kind of just win at home, even if
Yeah.
you play horribly in the next few games.
Yeah.
Um, then after that, New Orleans, Oklahoma City, game 2. This one was a blowout, 124-92. OKC just dominated pretty much, from the jump. I mean, I know, at halftime, I think they were up 13, but it just never really felt like New Orleans. I mean, early on, you saw Valanciunas. I think he scored the first 9 points of the game. And then Chet Holmgren came right back. He had, 20 in the first half.
Yeah.
Um,
Hit a
and
couple of
then,
threes.
yeah, hit a couple of threes, had 26 for the game, 7 boards, 2 blocks. Shea had 33 and 5 with 2 steals, 3 of 5 from 3, 13 of 19 from the field. So incredible efficiency. Um, Jalen Williams at 21, 7 and 5. Lou Dort at 15. Played great defense on Ingram. Right. Isaiah Joe hit some threes off the bench. Right. Cason Wallace had 2 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, but played good defense.
Hmm.
Aaron Wiggins came in and hit some momentum plays. I mean, for the most part, again, it was a blowout. They won by 30 points basically. The New Orleans was bad, right? Like Ingram actually, to be fair, wasn't that bad in this game. He in the second half was fine, 18 and 3. Herb Jones, 18, Valanciunas had 19. But some of this was like when the game was already over. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
and that's kind of the funny thing, like when you look back at the box score, where it's like there are some stats that don't really look that bad. But if you actually watch the game, like that's not actually what happened.
Sure.
Where like a lot of it was kind of like when the game was out of reach. And this was a game where like it was kind of an interesting clash of two different styles because New Orleans has more size than OKC, but OKC flies around, and I mean, they have the best player on the floor. Um, and then like even a guy like Shea, right? He can play point. I know he doesn't get like a ton of assists, but he can basically he's your offense, and he's better at running their offense, than whoever New Orleans has, especially without Zion, right? Because without Zion, you're kind of like we're probably going to have to find a way, to just, play really good defense, knock down some threes, get offensive rebounds. But, it didn't happen in this game. And OKC shot the ball really well from 3. And, that's just kind of tough to do. You know what I mean? Like, that's
Yeah.
just, ultimately, that's rough, for New Orleans. But we expected OKC, to probably win the series or at least defend home court. It looked kind of scary in game 1, but they got it done in game 2. And, now New Orleans, you know, we'll have to see if they protect home court. I don't feel like I feel like they're going to lose at least one game. Maybe you'll get some role players to show up, but right now without Zion, OKC is like clearly the better team.
Yeah.
Um, so
And Homelander's pretty confident in a sweep here. He's been screaming sweep for about the past couple of live streams, which might happen and may not. But with OKC, I think now that they've gotten their feet wet in the first game, and then now they're pretty much in the ocean now. Yeah, it's crazy. I think this team has a lot of potential, especially with Shea leading the charge. And you can just tell it's a great group of guys. They fit together, they gel together on and off the court. The play style is amazing. Like you said, when they're hot, I think they're one of the most dangerous teams in the NBA. When you're shooting 60% from the field as a team and almost 50% from three, I think you're borderline unstoppable, especially if you're going up against New Orleans, where they're pretty much hobbled. And Ingram's not much of a defender. Valanciunas is kind of rough, in the pick and roll sometimes. McCollum, it's tough. I think, clearly New Orleans is outmatched, outclassed, I think, in this matchup without Zion. I think if Zion was here, we'd probably be talking about this series in a completely different vein because, he's an impact, more than an impact player. He's their superstar. He's their best player. And, it's tough when you don't have your best player. And that's kind of been the story with New Orleans for the past few years. And it continues. And, I think, OKC is going to walk away with this series. I don't know if it's going to be a sweep, but yeah, they're going to walk away confidently, I think.
Exactly. I mean, and again, for OKC, this is kind of one of the best case scenarios you could have gotten where you get into the playoffs. You're not playing, a super experienced team, like LA, or Golden State. Not that they would lose, but, not that they're going to lose. But, this is the best case scenario where you get, kind of a solid matchup in round one, but not one that you're afraid of losing, just to kind of get your feet wet and get adjusted to playoff basketball. And then once you get into the next round and the competition gets better, then you'll be ready, and you'll be, more adjusted to how the playoffs, has been. Because
Absolutely.
in the first game, it looked kind of shaky, right? Where it looked like they might actually lose the game one in an upset. And then, in game two, you could tell, early on, even though New Orleans scored the first 9 points, you could tell early on they looked a lot more comfortable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think I went out of order.
It's fine.
Okay. All right. All right, so moving on, into another game, Indiana, Milwaukee, game 2, right? So Indiana did what they needed to do, got the split. Obviously no Giannis in this game. Pretty sure there's not going to be Giannis for game 3 either, right? So Indiana did what they needed to do. It was a close game in the first half. Indiana kind of ran out, rough shot over Milwaukee in the second half. For Milwaukee, kind of a similar thing with Lillard, where most of his scoring was done in the first half. Not a whole lot of stuff in the second half, except this time around he didn't have the same help. There were a lot of guys, for Milwaukee that played, relatively poorly. I think Middleton got hurt in the game as well, so we'll see. He did play 36 minutes, but he did hurt his ankle, so we'll see if he plays. I think he's listed as questionable for game 3. But then you look around, right? Like Javi Portis was 6 of 16, Brook Lopez 1 of 5. I mean, and then also really, and then you look at Indiana, 125. Siakam, 37 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists. Milwaukee doesn't have anybody right now without Giannis to really, guard him at all. And that was kind of the factor, that you mentioned, right? When you picked Indiana to win the series, you mentioned that they won, the previous matchups in the regular season. And all of those were before Halliburton even played, or excuse me, Siakam even played. Didn't look great in game 1, right? But in game 2, you could tell they adjusted more and became a lot more comfortable, with playoff basketball. And we've seen that before, right? Where it's like it's this team's first time in the playoffs. They look awful in the first game. It's like they forgot that this isn't the regular season anymore. This is the playoffs. And then ideally the coaches and the players make adjustments to what they're doing. The rotation makes a lot more sense, right? Like we didn't see 10 guys in the first quarter like last time, right? We saw a little bit more of an organization in terms of the rotation, right? Like the backups that played was, they played 8 guys basically, right? I think, you had the starting 5, then you had Obi Toppin, Ben Shepherd, TJ McConnell.
Yep.
Halliburton had 12 and 12. Still doesn't really look like himself, for the most part. But when you have Siakam playing like he does, and then Miles Turner chipped in with 22 and 7, with 3 blocks and 6 assists. Obviously, we already talked about Siakam. Nesmith was better in this game than before. You got everybody to chip in, and that's kind of what you need if you're Indiana, especially if Halliburton still quite isn't himself. And then again, with Siakam, he's the guy with the playoff experience, and he's been going right at Milwaukee, and he's even shooting the 3 ball well, which is funny because in Toronto, he wasn't shooting the three well at all. And we were kind of wondering, like, can he just not shoot the basketball anymore? But for Indiana, he shot, what, like 40-ish% from three.
Mhm.
And it's continued into the playoffs, and he's been able to score, everywhere, right? Not just, I mean, he hit 3 threes, but he made 16 shots, right? So there were the mid ranges, the fades, right, driving to the basket. Um, again, he's been great. He's been I guess through the first two games, you know, he's kind of matched Damian Lillard's output, and he's been able to do more in the second half, than Damian Lillard. Which is kind of wild, right? Because you would have assumed that it would have been Halliburton that would have needed to be the best player on the floor. But without Giannis, it changes. The map and the formula kind of changes. So, for Indiana, again, we thought that they were going to win the first game, but they got destroyed. But they came back and blew the Bucks out in the second game. So that's kind of the best you can hope for. I think you would have liked to have won the first two games, especially without Giannis. But getting a split isn't the worst case scenario either, right? What would have been bad is if you lost both games in Milwaukee. But now that you got the split, now the pressure goes back to Milwaukee, try to win a game in Indiana, where we assume that in Indiana, the role guys are going to play possibly even better. And then as the series goes on, guys, ideally will get more comfortable with their roles and their minutes. So we'll see, but it's a really good bounce back win for Indiana. Also, the 3-point shooting was significantly better. It was terrible in the first game. They shot 20% from three. This time they shot 44. So
Yeah.
when you're, a team that relies a lot on the three, that can kind of change, your offensive output from game to game, right? Like a team like the Nuggets doesn't really rely on the three, but a team like Indiana kind of does, right? And obviously some of that's personnel as well. So when you shoot well and you create good looks, right, then that's how you win. And not all their looks in the first game were bad. There were a lot of open looks, I think, that just didn't go down. And again, over the course of a series, that can kind of change, how a series looks. If a guy, gets cold, all of a sudden just has a rough stretch for a couple of games, that can kind of cost the team, two games, right? And then if a guy gets hot, same thing.
Yeah. And, this is kind of what I expected initially, how, I thought Indiana was going to open the series exactly like this. But, you can't really control a Damian Lillard masterclass performance. But, in this game, like you said, the role players, they turned up. Nebhard, he looked very good, 8 for 11. Neesmith actually shooting well, 40% from the field. Turner also looked very aggressive. The only guy that I'm still a little bit concerned about is Tyrese Halliburton, but at the same time, you can look at his points responsible for, and then you can feel pretty good about, what he was able to do offensively, with his 12 points and obviously 12 assists. But Siakam is a huge deal for them because, like I had talked about earlier, was, this team never really faced the Pacers where they had Siakam. You can definitely tell because he was attacking them, like you said, from the jump. And even like if you look at Damian Lillard and Pat Bev, I feel like they pretty much got attacked as well. Nemhard was doing his thing. Tyrese Halliburton somewhat, but he's been a little timid. I think I can't tell if it's his injury from earlier in the season or if he's trying to defer to Siakam. I really can't tell. But regardless, I think that has to go away, and he has to shake whatever that is off, if possible, later in the series, and if they do really want to advance, because I think they need him to be on his, A game for them to actually advance. But, you can't really hate on it because he did do an amazing job playmaking as per usual. And the bench guys, they showed up. So I think overall better team basketball, and obviously you were able to mitigate a huge Dame first half explosion. But this is the exact kind of version that I wanted to see, of Indiana from the jump.
And the defense, was better, I think. And like when you're able to get stops and get out and run, that's Indiana Pacers, basketball that we
Mm-hmm.
saw during the regular season. Versus like, okay, Lillard's just lighting them up down the floor every time. And then
Exactly.
even when they try trapping and blitzing them, then they gives up open shots, to other guys, and then you just get ran off the floor. Um, so that's really the key, right? Obviously, I think at this point the X factor really for Milwaukee is how long does it take for Giannis to come back, if he even comes back at all?
Mm-hmm.
Do you risk a scenario like a Durant situation where you bring him back because you're trying to win the series, but then he ends up re-injuring the calf, and then it becomes worse, like a torn Achilles. We don't want that. So
Right.
I don't know, how long it takes for him to come back. Really, it kind of just depends on like if the Bucks, if they win, if they split in Indiana, right, then you're able to buy Giannis some time. So, really, I would probably say you need to win if you're Milwaukee one of the first two games. I think preferably game three,
Hmm.
just so that puts more pressure on Indiana. Um, just because again, like that's kind of what you have to do. Like if you want Giannis to come back, then you kind of have to, extend the series as opposed to like, obviously if you lose, then the series is done. Because I think they need Giannis, right? Because he's kind of the key, to if you're the Bucks to kind of beating this Pacers team because they don't have an answer for him, on either end of the floor. But without him, then you're kind of relying on okay, can the Bucks hit enough, jumpers, in order to kind of offset what they're not going to be able to do around the basket, right? And like even in this game, like they didn't shoot that badly. They shot 40%. Again, some of those shots were when the game was starting to kind of go away. Um, but like at the same time, like Indiana shot really well from the field as well. And then giving up offensive boards, and all that, and everything else. It's just
Yeah,
tough. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
like
100%.
if you're yeah, but either way, like I don't feel like either team at this point should be super concerned. It's just I guess the question is that if you're Milwaukee, you know, like what do you do, in the next couple of games, right? Because again, Lillard's played pretty well in these games, but the issue has been the second halves. He's been kind of shut down, and I feel like in Indiana, you probably need a game from start to finish where he's really good, as opposed to like a game where he kind of just disappears in the second half because you may not get the role player performances, on the road. Maybe you do, and if you do, you're gonna win.
Hmm.
But and again, like it's a tough ask, right? Because obviously, he's one guy, but this is also kind of why you got him, right? So if he could steal you two games, while Giannis is out, that's kind of, what all you can really ask for if you're Milwaukee. And then if you're Indiana, how long does it take for Halliburton to get going? Because I feel like, if you're in Indiana and Halliburton has a huge game, that's probably going to lead to like another, blowout, right? Because I don't necessarily know if you can just ask, some of these guys to do what they've been able to do. Siakam, it seems like his play is pretty sustainable because the Bucks don't have anybody that can guard him, right? I mean, like the only guy, you got Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez, and those guys are too slow. I think to be able to keep up with him. So, if Siakam is basically the best player in the series, right, then that shifts it towards Indiana.
Yeah. What a twist of events, turn of events. It's kind of crazy. Who would have thought we would have been talking about Siakam being like the best player in the series? But like even for me, I think the Bucks' X factor should be, Chris Middleton, because I think, if he plays well in tandem with Dame, I think that'll
Yeah.
take some pressure off of Dame, and then maybe, he can get something going in the second half. Because I think, if Middleton plays well, they could potentially keep it close. However, that might be a tall task considering, what they were able to do defensively on in this game.
Because that's the thing is that like Middleton, he's been he's looked okay, right? He's not been bad at all. But I think ideally you kind of need some like you said, sort of turn back the clock performances where
Yeah.
you're getting kind of like championship level Middleton. But
Hmm.
is it there? I don't necessarily know because that's kind of that like you said that's pretty much the key if you're the Bucks because you're supposed to have kind of I guess a big three essentially. And so if you get like you said both Middleton and Lillard playing at a high level, that's probably enough, and then you add in a couple role players. That's probably enough to get a win against the Pacers.
Yeah, for sure.
But like you said, without him, then I don't know, right?
Yeah.
Like, and again, he's questionable to play. I'm gonna assume he's gonna play, but even if he does play, what does he look like? Right? Is he kind of limited? We just don't know. So there's
Right.
still a lot of questions that have to be answered. But that again, that's kind of the rough part when your best player is hurt is that you end up having to get more performances out of guys that you don't know if they have it yet.
Yeah.
And then moving on, Mavs Clippers. The Mavs evened up the series 96-93. And this was a game where, again, Luca and Kyrie, obviously did their thing. Luca at 32 and 9, did shoot 11 for 26. But, still played well, I think.
Yeah.
Hit some big shots, especially in the fourth, right? Kyrie did his thing with 23, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, also had 3 steals. I thought he brought it on the defensive end, which was kind of interesting. He
And
made a
Luca
lot of
too.
big plays. Yeah, and Luka too, right? I think there was a stat line that showed like guys have not shot well when they're being guarded by Luka, which is kind of interesting. in this series, right? I
Yeah.
think it's like 20-ish%.
Yeah, they
Or
stopped
something.
sending help. They let Luca go one on one with a lot of guys, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And then even in this game, right? You look around, Hardaway gets hurt, which kind of frees up more minutes for, a guy like a Josh Green. Gafford got hurt, which gave more minutes to Lively and Maxi Kleba. And it kind of changed the rotation a little bit, right? Because, like, with Hardaway, you get 3-point shooting, but not necessarily a ton defensively. Whereas with Josh Green, you don't get the same explosiveness, but I
Hmm.
think you get, some better defense and rebounding. And he was a -6 in this game. But he did have 7 rebounds. He played hard. He contributed to some of them, the fast breaks. And then Maxi Kleba came in, which was a guy that we were kind of out on. And he had a big fourth, where he hit a, go ahead three, had some rebounds, and it allowed them to kind of switch and play good defense. Derek Jones Jr. and PJ Washington, right? This was kind of the defense that we saw from the Mavs during their run in the regular season, right? Which we didn't see in game one. But we saw it in this game where they got a lot of contributions from guys on both ends of the floor, but particularly defensively, right? I mean, PJ Washington had 18.6 rebounds, blew some layups, but did hit some threes, some big threes.
Yeah,
Um,
elite corner shooting this game.
yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the thing for Dallas is that if you get enough defense alongside Luca and Kyrie, that protects them defensively and that allows them to be more effective on the defensive end, knowing that there's other guys that can actually help them out. Um, and then obviously offensively, right? Like late in the game, they were able to kind of do their thing. Playing hero ball, but there's not too many guys that you'd rather want to play hero ball with than that combination of guys, and that's how they can win a lot of these close games. And then on the other end, right with the Clippers, this was Kawhi's game. He came back. I think some people, we were kind of surprised, I guess, because like there wasn't really a whole lot of positivity, like in terms of like knowing whether when he was going to come back, but he did come back. Looked a little off in this game, kind of rusty, which makes sense. He hadn't played in a couple of weeks. Um, had 15, 7, and 4 steals and a block. Didn't make a single three. Looked better, I guess, as the game went along, but still looked just kind of rusty, kind of off, and it kind of hurt the Clippers, I think, energy and momentum in the game. Not saying that like they shouldn't have played him, but like just the way they were flying around up and down in game one, I think kind of hurt. But also like you didn't have as good of a game from some of the other guys. Like Harden had 22 and 8, but he was 2 for 10 from three, which makes a big difference.
Yep.
Because that's kind of what his offense is a little bit more so relegated to now, right? He took 14 shots, 10 of those were threes. Um, Zubac, until late in the game, wasn't quite as impactful. They were kind of able to limit him. Paul George was fine. Westbrook 2 for 9, did have 9 rebounds and 3 assists and a steal and a block. Plumlee didn't do much. Norman Powell didn't do much. I mean, really, like the offense for the Clippers became kind of stagnant, right? They had a stretch where they just could not score. They shot 37% from the field. I mean, again, it's like what we talked about with the Mavs, where it's a jump shooting team for the most part. They don't have a lot of guys that put a lot of pressure on the rim that can kind of just play downhill and get to the basket. Not that like Kawhi and Paul George can't do it, but they're more comfortable taking pull up jump shots, like we talked about with the Suns. Zubac is kind of the rim pressure guy because of the fact that you can just dump the ball down low to him and he can pretty much do whatever he wants around the basket for the most part. Because they had a stretch, I think, in the fourth where they basically had what Kawhi and Paul George as your 4 and 5, where Zubac wasn't even out there. I guess because they wanted to switch defensively.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Then they were giving up rebounds, and it's kind of rough. Like, and the thing is with this Clippers team is that it's kind of just like most teams with a superstar, it's predicated on okay, Kawhi plays like a top 5 player. Everybody else, fills in their roles, and then that's a championship caliber team. But if you don't get that version of Kawhi, that's where it becomes really difficult. So hopefully, for his sake, over the course of the series, he progresses and gets better and better. Because if he doesn't, not that they still couldn't beat Dallas, but it makes it a lot tougher. Because it feels like Dallas may have found something with some of those combinations. So maybe you don't rush Hardaway back, like maybe you might have considered, and you play some of these other guys and just kind of run it through Luca and Kyrie for the most part, and just let them cook, and then just surround them with more defense and athleticism and rebounding. But again, for the Mavs, this is his best that you could hope for is get a split. Obviously, it hurts to lose the one without Kawhi and get blown off the floor. Um, but it was a good bounce back win. We'll see what happens in Dallas. Dallas has
Yeah.
been really good at home. But the Clippers have been good on the road. So, we'll see, what version of the Clippers we get, so, a split isn't the worst position for either team. Just obviously if you're the Clippers, now you got to take home court back and you got to win one in Dallas. And it's going to be harder, I think, to do that if Kawhi is not, at his best. But, like, I don't think you could afford to just sit him. Like, if he's okay to play, you might as well play him and let him get his rhythm back, because otherwise, if it's like game 6, game 7, and it's a must win and he comes back then like you're kind of just done.
Yeah, and it's like, with this game, I think, a huge factor was Kawhi being kind of quiet, if you want me to be honest. It was a very underwhelming performance from him coming back. I think, he didn't really make much of a difference, and it kind of showed, in the box score. I hate to be, the guy that points at the box score, but it wasn't really very effective. 7 for 17, didn't hit a three, -8 plus minus, so 15 points. So not like a huge showing for him, but obviously the name of the game was Luka for this one. Him calling out James Harden, isoing, and then dropping the 30-footer was kind of wild. I think that was probably the highlight of the game for sure. Maybe you could argue the Kyrie pass was wild too, but it's really fun to watch both of these guys, and Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, kind of cook in the fourth quarter. And I think that's something that they bring that a lot of other teams don't really have, where you were talking about it earlier with freelancing. It's very special, I think, because it kind of catches people off guard, because you're looking at ISOs and then you might kind of want to double the guy like Kyrie. I think, Kyrie and Luke are two guys that will draw a lot of double teams. And then it goes back to the gambling and leaving a guy like PJ Washington. And, he hit 3 corner threes, if I'm not mistaken. So he showed up. And I think that's a huge thing, because he hasn't really shown up offensively. I think he's shown up a little bit defensively, but for him to show up on both ends of the floor, that's huge. And I think, that makes the difference, obviously. And then Lively being able to sub in for Gafford like that is a huge deal as well, because I think Gafford has been quiet, and he was quiet up until the injury, obviously. So Lively coming in and making an immediate impact is amazing. And then you look around at the Clippers, it just really didn't look that good. And honestly, if you want me to be like frank, I think, Dallas just wasn't as awful as the Clippers in this game, if you want to be real. Because I think, Dallas, they shot amazing from the three, 40+%. But then you look at the Clippers, not too high. 8 for 30, that's 26%. And that's something that I think you can really look at, and that might be their demise. Because, you got Westbrook taking threes late in the game, although he did hit one. You've got Kawhi taking 5 threes, not making one. Harden 2 for 10. I think sometimes they just fall in love with that thing a little bit too much for my liking, especially if you have guys that, may not be the best. And I get it. Like Harden, he can catch fire. Don't get me wrong, which we saw in game 1. But when it's off, it doesn't look pretty. And I think, Dallas is one of those teams that can easily capitalize on it. And then, like you were talking about, Luka Doncic's defense was pretty interesting in this game, because I think they were combined 1 for 12 when Luka was closing out, which is odd, because normally you think of Luka and you're like, it's a guy who can't really defend. But for him to kind of be engaged on both ends of the floor is going to take the Dallas Mavericks, I think, to a whole nother level. And this is exactly what Dallas was supposed to do. This is why I picked them. I think this is probably why you picked them as well, where you can kind of see where the Clippers are going to probably have some awkward lapses, and I think Dallas is one of those teams that can easily take advantage of it, just because of their offensive firepower, especially having Kyrie and Luka Doncic as a duo. I think in the playoffs, that's arguably one of the top ones in the league.
Especially, I think, with a Kawhi that's not the same. I think that also, factors in as well. Because again, a healthy Kawhi, I think, makes it a tougher series for Dallas to win. Not that they couldn't, but it makes it, just a tougher matchup. Because then you have a guy on the other end who can match it. But if Kawhi's not 100%, then you're basically asking like Paul George, or Harden to kind of, match what Luka and Kyrie are doing. And
Right.
I don't necessarily think they're going to be capable of doing that 4 out of 7 times.
Right.
Did it once. So, I guess you just need 3 more, but still, that's the tough part, because again, that's why injuries kind of suck, because again, that's your best player. And, it's not like it's the 12th man or the 15th guy on the roster. That's the guy that your team is built around.
For sure.
And if he's not healthy, it just makes things a lot harder for, everyone. Obviously, not just, obviously themselves, it makes it harder, but, for the rest of the team. Because again, he's not going to be able to just do the same types of things where, like, superstars can bail you out a lot. And, if he's not going to be able to do that, then, that's where it becomes tougher.
Yes, sir.
Then moving on, probably the most surprising victory, the Miami Heat over the Boston Celtics in game 2 in Boston, 111-101. Don't know if we'll see it again, but obviously, you know, we talked about it going into the playoffs. I think especially after the game ones, where I'm like, if you had to pick, a series that was most likely to be a sweep, which one was it? And I was like, it's probably like close between like this one and like Lakers Nuggets.
Hmm.
And the Heat, even if they lose, they're not going to get swept.
Yeah,
Um,
facts.
which is yeah, this was just from start to finish, just a really impressive win by the Heat, right? I know they were down at halftime, but for a good chunk of the game, they controlled the game on both ends of the floor, right? They were switching and flying around defensively, communicating really well, kind of shutting down Boston's like drive and kick and kind of like motion offense, for the most part, and kind of forcing guys into just jacking up and chucking up one-on-one type shots, which is the offense from Boston that we don't like, right?
Hmm.
Where they don't really look like a serious championship contender. Porzingis really struggled in this game, right? He was guarding Bam. He got, he
Obliterated.
got torched. Bam at 21 and 10, 9 of 13 from the field, right? And a lot of that was tough shots because they were some fadeaways and some pull up middies. But
Floaters.
still, like it looked really easy for Bam just shooting over the top, which is wild to say, shooting over the top of a guy taller than you.
Hmm.
But either way, Porzingis was 1 for 9. Yeah, he wasn't good, and that was kind of really the difference, I think, in this game. Because I mean, you did get some good performances by some guys. Some of it again was when the game was over, but like in the first half, like Brown and Tatum played pretty well. I think for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that the other guards for the Celtics, like White and Holiday, weren't that great, but you were kind of just waiting for like one more guy for the Celtics to show up, and they didn't. The Heat shot 23 of 43 from three, which is 54%. I think that was a franchise record for them.
Yeah.
If you hit over 23s in a game, you're probably going to win that game. That's what we saw in game 1 with Boston. Um, but the quality of the looks they generated were really high. I mean, like obviously, like you look around, 3 of 6 for Jaquez, 3 of 4 for Jovic. Some of those Jovic threes were kind of nuts, but like they go in. Martin was 5 of 6. Hero was 6 for 11. Highsmith 3 for 5. Robinson and Wright didn't kill them. Like Wright was 5 of 5, I think, in game 1.
Hmm.
But just in general, like a lot of really high quality generated looks. And again, obviously, like it's not the end of the world if you're the Celtics, but that type of game is kind of one of the reasons why like you kind of feel a little bit skeptical at times about the Celtics because they've been in a lot of games where they've just ran teams off the floor. But then when it's a close game, you kind of wonder how did they respond? This is a team that they've been beaten by multiple times in the playoffs, including last year. Um, and this Heat's team is worse because they're down Jimmy Butler and Terry Rozier, and then like everybody in that starting five pretty much just lit them up, and that's not a great look for Boston. And it kind of felt weird, like in the towards the end of the first game, right, where it's like they were up like almost 40, and then the Heat kind of just stormed back, and like you take your foot off the gas when you're up by that much,
Hmm.
but it kind of carried over into this game, sort of, and it's not great to, kind of open up your first round with a home loss, in one of the first 2 games. Again, they're still going to win the series, but, just a lot. And again, like if a team hits 23s, like you're probably not winning. But just the way that it happened just kind of was reminiscent of what happened because a lot of the games that the Heat beat the Celtics in last year came down to games like this, where like it was a lot of zone defense. They created a lot of really good 3-point looks, and then they just hit every single one of them. And like
Yeah.
that's what happened last year, and it was just very reminiscent of that. And it just kind of gives me pause, like where I'm like, okay, I'm not saying the Celtics can't win the title, right? Like they can, but like if they get out of the East and they face, presumably the Nuggets, like do we see them winning 4 out of 7? I don't necessarily think so. Like
No.
I know some people are saying like they would get swept. Like I don't think it'd be a sweep because they're just more than capable of winning games. It's just like games like this just kind of give me pause, like in terms of again, like I don't feel great about that in crunch time. And I don't even remember the Celtics crunch time stats. Like they're not the best in the league. Like they haven't had a lot of them because a lot of them were just blowouts. But just in the playoffs, it just feels like a similar script might happen again. But maybe it doesn't. right? And if it doesn't, then they probably, have a, will win the title or at least have a really good shot. But, this was not a great performance, I think, and especially in a game where both your stars played relatively well. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the other thing. But, like, again, also it was like a horrible Porzingis game. And he's kind of their X factor that we talked about, where it's like if he's either hurt or in foul trouble or doesn't play well, it's just a fundamentally different team, and they look worse. And it's going to look worse in the playoffs because I know their record without him in the regular season is really good. You're not going to win 60 plus games, and then a guy misses like 20 plus games, and not have like a decent record with him out there. But we know in the playoffs they need him, and he 1 for 9 is just awful.
Yeah, he's make or break for them. I mean, it was definitely broke this game. But for me, I don't know how I feel about it because I don't want to come off across as like a Miami Heat hater. But to me, it seems like this was more of a game of luck, and I know luck is a huge deal in basketball because shooting
Right.
53% from the 3-point line is unheard of. I think they're like the only team to do that 2 times in playoffs or something like that. Some weird stat, and I think it's been both against Boston, unironically.
Exactly.
Um,
That's
yeah,
the weird part.
and it's like it just strikes me as too odd, and too coincidental at times as well because it's like it's against the same team. But with Boston, I feel like if you have a good Porzingis game, you probably win this game. If you want me to be honest.
I agree.
And Miami did their job. Like I'm not trying to take anything away from them. They like you said, they generated high quality open looks. Tyler Hero having a masterclass game, where he has 24 points and 14 assists along with that, and taking control of the ball and keeping it together. And I think that's kind of the intriguing thing as well, because I think he's substituting well, I guess, for Terry Rozier through 2 games. I think you like a lot from what he's given you, but at the same time, is it sustainable? Probably not. I don't think Miami's going to take Boston to 7 or anything like that. But for them to drop this one at home, Boston, that is, I think that's the really rough part, alongside having a horrible Porzingis game where Jason Tatum, I think, played very well. And then you look at Jaylen Brown, I think, he played arguably a little bit worse at times. But at the end of the day, it's tough when a guy is shooting 5 for 6 from the 3-point line, 3 for 4, 6 for 11, 3 for 6. Like, it just keeps coming down. And, like,
Yeah.
what can you do at that point? And they came out flat in the second half, if you want me to be real. I think they went into the half up by like 3 or something like that. And then, the third quarter, I don't know what's been going on with a lot of these teams in the playoffs, but the third quarter seems to really hurt a lot of them. And that's exactly what happened here. And, Porzingis didn't really do much of anything. 1 for 9. I think that's kind of unacceptable. And you do have to give Bam his credit. I think, Bam is one of the best defenders at that position. But Porzingis was brought here to kind of elevate the Celtics game. And if you can't really elevate against Miami, then I think you've lost a lot of respect from, basketball watchers and fans, if you want me to be honest.
And I mean, he played 29, 30 minutes, which is kind of wild. And it wasn't like he was in foul trouble. I mean, he
Right.
had 3 fouls. I think he picked some of them up like kind of in succession, but
hmm
he was truly awful. I mean, that again, does he have a game like that again? I mean, I don't know.
I
Probably
think he
not,
will.
but
I
he
don't know if
might.
he
I mean, he
will
might.
in the series. I think it might happen later on in the playoffs, but maybe not
Right.
this series.
Yeah, I mean, look at the plus minuses. He was minus 32 in a game that was a 10-point loss. Like that's I mean, even Jaylen Brown was a minus 22.
Yeah.
Jason Tatum was a plus 6, Derek White minus 23. Like again, there were like some weird stretches where like Porzingis wasn't even out there and they had Horford out there and he was okay, but like I don't know. Like I guess it was just like because Porzingis was so bad, he was like, let me just try Horford. But then it's like you need Porzingis to be good. So I think that's kind of like you said, what we chalk it up to, where it's like you had a horrible Porzingis game, you had a crazy 3-point game from Miami. It's just like you said, just you would expect a game like this to happen in Miami,
Right.
like not in Boston, right? You know what I
That's
mean?
what
Like I think,
concerns me, because I feel
yeah,
like
like
if they go down to Miami, like if this series turns 2-1, I don't care, win or lose this series, they've lost my respect. That can't happen. If you want me to be real.
kind of weird because like you look in past playoffs or postseasons or whatever, and
hmm
like you had the Spurs, I think in 2014 that won the title. They beat the Heat in 5, but then they had that weird first round series against Dallas
hmm
that went like 7.
Right.
Like so, it's like sometimes like for whatever weird reason, sometimes like an earlier round matchup can be more difficult. It just kind of depends. But
But this is
it's
Miami,
just
no Jimmy. Like,
right. Like
come on, man.
it just the talent level just doesn't add up. But then it's like, it's like I don't know, it's just a weird thing, but it just kind of depends because like with the Heat, again, if they have a 23-point shooting game at home, then like yeah, they can win. But like you said, there's kind of a lot of luck involved with that. Like they could go home and then in the next game they could shoot, 5 of 20 or something like that from three. But for the Heat, that's kind of the only way you can win because you're down in terms of the talent. So you have to basically win, like we said with the Lakers Nuggets, you have to win on the margin. So you have to be able to generate really good looks offensively. You have to convert, right? And like you said, some of that's luck, right? Where like, you could have 43 3-point attempts. Half of them could be wide open and they could all miss. Like we saw it in the Indiana game 1 where like they did generate a decent amount of open looks. None of them went in.
Yeah.
But if they do, then it's a blowout. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of how you have to factor it in. But like you said, it just feels so strange with Boston because it's just like, again, this is a team that they have lost to multiple times, but it is one game. And like you said, it wouldn't shock me at all if like it's game 3 in Miami and then Boston just beats them by like 40. Like,
Right. That's what I
like
expect.
right. Like we both know that the Celtics will win this series. It's
I
just a
hope.
matter of, yeah, like if that happened, I mean, I don't really know what I would say. I mean, I guess it would be really funny, but at the
Yeah,
same
I wouldn't
time,
stop laughing for years.
yeah, but at the same time, it would be very shocking, I think. You know what I mean?
100%.
Like, so, I mean, I don't, yeah, but either way, like, you chalk it up to Miami. It was a good, very good game plan by Spoelstra, who continues to show why he's the best coach in the NBA.
Yeah, for sure.
But either way, is that going to happen again? I don't know, because like some of the shots, some of the Bam shots were like, I don't know if he's going
Tough
to shoot
buckets,
seven.
bro.
I don't know if he's going to shoot 70% from the field again. Like
Right.
maybe he does, but like that's a lot to ask.
Yeah, for sure.
And then to close it out, right? We have the 3-game threes, right? That recently happened. Before we started recording.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have Cavs Magic game 3. The Magic destroyed Cleveland in this game. They won by 38 points. The game was pretty much over. Um, you know, early in the third. I mean, I thought it was kind of over at halftime. They were down. I think Cleveland was down by like 17ish
Yeah.
or so, and the script just completely flipped. At home, you expected a better game from a lot of the role players for Orlando, and Jalen Suggs, he was 9 for 11 from the field, 3 of 5 from three, 24 points, 2 steals, pretty much shut down the Cavs guards. I think Mitchell also got hurt
Yeah.
I think in the third, so that's something to kind of watch out for because of his injury, kind of because he still played, but he didn't look the same. And if he's kind of limited a little bit, that probably flips the series closer
Mm-hmm.
to Orlando. Because you need Donovan Mitchell to be Donovan Mitchell if you want to win this series, and he was already dealing, kind of with some injury issues before the playoffs. Um, but and then Paolo was the best player on the floor, right? He had 31 points, 14 rebounds, 5 assists through 3 quarters,
No
right? This was
turnovers this time, too.
yeah, no turnovers in 29 minutes through 3 quarters. Didn't play at all in the fourth. They did make an adjustment in the starting group. They put Wendell Carter Jr. back in there, and they kind of gave Isaac more limited minutes. And again, like everybody pretty much for the most part played well on both ends of the floor. I know there were some guys like Wendell Carter Jr. had 2 points, Gary Harris had 2 points, but like they contributed, at least defensively.
Yep.
But then also, again, as we mentioned, so many of these series come down to, and so many of these games come down to who's the best player on the floor. And Paolo was far and away the best player on the floor. The Cavs bigs weren't quite as dominant in this game, right? Mobley only had 10 points. And that's kind of the X factor that we talked about for Cleveland is how do the two bigs play? They didn't play as well this game.
Right.
I mean, nobody really for the Cavs really played well. It's kind of why they lost by 40. But the fact that Orlando flipped the script and just destroyed them is just kind of wild. But again, you know, I you know, I thought I picked the Cavs to win the series, but at the same time, like it was not a series that I expected to be like a sweep. I thought that the Magic could fight. It really kind of to me was just dependent on what did Orlando look like at home.
Mm-hmm.
Does the offense carry over? And that's kind of the key for them Orlando to win is they have to have a better offensive game. I don't necessarily know if it's sustainable.
Right.
because again, 9 of 11 for Jalen Suggs. Shout out to him. He had his injury, but looked great. Even had a crazy dunk in the game. And then Paolo, right? Again, does he do that again? He's been very good. He was very good in this game, and he's gotten better as the series has progressed. So if it kind of flips to all of a sudden he's the best player on the floor, then that's where Orlando is probably going to have a really good shot at upsetting the Cavs. And again, you got to keep an eye out for that Mitchell injury because he didn't look the same after that. So, hopefully he comes back and he's just fine, in the next game. But, this was a very impressive win, I think, by Orlando because they got kind of spanked in the first two games on the road, which you kind of expect, but they came back and stomped them by even more. So that's where you're really impressed by that team. So now you kind of wonder, can you carry the momentum into the next game? Because so many more guys played well in this game than in the previous game. And that was kind of the difference here. And the Cavs just looked, I mean, awful.
Yeah,
When you lose
they're
by 40 in the playoff game, there are really no positives,
yeah,
I would say,
for
in
sure.
a game like
And I think when you're down 2-0 like Orlando was, and you're at home for Game 3, this is exactly how you should respond. And this is what I think I expected from them. And like I was talking about earlier in Game 2, I feel like Paolo, it's just nerves. First time in the playoffs. Franz, I'm expecting more from him on the 3-point line. That could be make or break. Come down to like say Game 7 or something like that. And like you said, Suggs probably isn't shooting 9 for 11 and 3 for 5 from the 3-point line. We got to be real here, but I think Paolo can definitely have a game like this again, where he's efficient from both the field and the 3-point line while taking care of the ball and being the best rebounder on the court. That's a huge deal as well for them. Considering how good Cleveland's front court is, and then also just being aggressive on defense. Like you said, Suggs pretty much shut down the entire backcourt of Cleveland, which is something that they're going to need to do. And this is why I chose Orlando in the first place. I was like, okay, maybe they can actually negate the front court and backcourt. And then, Paolo, that can kind of translate into offense where, you turn defense into offense. But, they need to do it again, and again, and again. So that's the tough part. Is that going to happen? It may or may not, but that was my prediction. Great game from Orlando as a whole, and way to bounce back because when you get punched in the mouth like how they did in the first two games, this is exactly how you're supposed to respond, and they did their job well.
Exactly. I think that's kind of the key there is that you always want to see the team that's down in the series. What does it look like when it goes back home? Do they respond or do they just kind of just flame out?
Oh boy,
Right. And we saw a little bit of both,
yes sir.
in these series. So we'll go on to the next one, Knicks Sixers.
Mm-hmm.
And the Sixers won 125, 114. Embiid had 50. He was on 19 shots, which is pretty impressive. 5 of 7 from three, 19 of 21 from the free throw line. Yeah, he did have a lot of free throw attempts in this game, for sure. It was kind of a weird first half, to be honest. There was a lot of like really physical back and forth plays. There was a play where I think it was Kyle Lowry, right? He had a flagrant foul on, I can't even remember who it was, but he committed a flagrant foul on somebody. Um, and then you had the play where like Embiid was on the ground and then just kind of grabbed Mitchell Robinson's leg.
Yeah, that was
While,
dirty.
yeah, and then Mitchell Robinson had to come out. Apparently, he's in a boot, which is not good.
Yeah,
For the Knicks because you need, that extra second, that extra big, out there, right? It can't really just be Hartenstein and I guess now Precious Achua. You don't have quite as much size and offensive rebounding advantages anymore. Um, and then obviously, from Philly again, some of the other role players showed up. Oubre was good, had 15 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals. Tobias Harris was quote unquote better, I guess. Still not great, but anyways. And then Tyrese Maxey was still good. Um, Cameron Payne, right? He had a big game in the third. Really, the third quarter was really kind of where things flipped because the Knicks were up in the first half by about 5 points.
mm-hmm.
Brunson actually had a much better, or at least much more efficient game in this game. He had 40, and 13, shot 48% from the field. But in the third quarter, that was really where everything flipped because Philly just went nuts. Where they just knocked down every shot. And again, that's the shot making from a team, especially at home, can kind of sometimes be what flips a game because it went from a game that it looked like the Sixers might lose at home, to a game where the Sixers won, in the fourth quarter relatively comfortably, right? I know they were never up by 20, but they were kind of consistently up between like 7 to 12, points in the fourth quarter. And every time the Knicks kind of made a run, then Embiid would get to the free throw line, and kept making them and making them over and over and over and over again. I mean, um, again, a huge game from him, obviously, right? Because again, you don't want to overstate, or understate the fact that 50 points in a playoff game, career high for him in a very important game, right? This was a must-win game where if they lose the game, they lose the series. Um, so you needed that from him. So that was good to see him step up and respond, because I don't necessarily know if a lot of people felt great about it. Just given how he had looked physically. We even heard, now after game three, which you kind of thought that he has Bell's palsy, right? Where like, if you look at his eyes, they've kind of been
Yeah.
messed up a little bit.
One of them doesn't blink. They don't blink at the same time, and that's like where part of your face is kind of paralyzed.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was Oubre, right, who kind of whacked him accidentally right in the face, I think, in the first game. So a lot of random weird stuff going on in the game. But, for the Knicks, it's rough because, it looked like you were on your way to possibly winning, that game and stealing it. But now, it's 2-1, so Philly did defend their home court for the first game. But now it sucks because it looks like you're going to be without Mitchell Robinson. And he's been kind of a big part of these first two games. We'll see if Achua can kind of come in and, fill the void. I don't know if he will. I mean, he wasn't bad um, at all, but you don't have the same rebounding and offensive rebounding advantages that you had with Robinson.
Hmm.
In addition to the extra size, that you have out there. So we'll see. Obviously, because that was huge for the Knicks to not lose game two at home. And to kind of steal it, so you kind of expected like, that something would kind of change, because I know like Embiid mentioned he didn't like, the calls at the end of the game. So he kind of expected that it was going to be called differently. Again, what are your thoughts? Like, they gave Embiid the flagrant one. Do you think that that was the right call? Because we saw, say like, I think, what was it, Draymond, right? He had the stomp, he got tossed. And obviously, I guess a stomp is a more egregious play, but grabbing a guy's leg in midair is kind of a dangerous play. But either way, again, still a really good win for Philly, and it was a must win. So it was good to see them respond. Now they have to do it again, and tie up the series, and then put the pressure back on the Knicks.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your first question about the foul, me personally, I thought he should have been thrown out of the game, but I get it. I get why you can't really toss Joel Embiid. I think you could toss Draymond, but you can't really toss Joel in this situation, just because of the the stuff that's at stake here. If you really think about it, Joel is out, they lose the game 100%. Because he contributed so much to the to this game offensively and defensively. But I looked at what the officiating crew chief said, and he explained the decision or whatever. They said that they were unanimous along with the replay center, that it was an unnecessary foul, but it did not rise to the level of flagrant 2. They said it rose to the level of flagrant 1, but they said it was not excessive and unnecessary, which is completely, false in my opinion, because I don't think, it's necessary to ever grab somebody's leg when they're attempting a dunk. I think that's dangerous. And like you talked about, the guy is injured now, Mitchell Robinson, that is, potentially, with walking away in a boot. So I think that was 100% a dirty play. And I think, Embiid let his tempers flare a little bit. And yeah, you could tell. He was very angry. Like, I think even the possession before that, he tried to like foul bait, as he normally would on a 3, and then like threw kind of like a temper tantrum at the ref and was kind of like jumping up and down like a toddler because he didn't get the call. And then I think it was I can't remember who it was. I think it was Anunoby. He kind of like ran into Embiid, and then Embiid got knocked down, and that's why he did that apparently. But regardless, I think I gained a lot of respect from Embiid during this game aside from that play, because now that we know what he's playing through, and to drop 50 points like that is kind of crazy. I think he did gain a lot of respect from me. and to play through an injury like that is a huge deal, I think, for sure. And then also, his 3-point shooting was amazing this game as well, and that really put them away 100%. But, if you're looking at this from a Knicks perspective, I don't think you feel too bad about losing this game. I think it was kind of expected that Philly was going to win this one, considering the way that game 2 went. It's just normally how it would go. You expect being down 2-0. The team who's going to be playing at home the next game should probably win, because that's kind of how the ebb and flow of basketball is. But overall, it's kind of awkward, I think. I think you do feel better if you are Philly. But Tobias Harris, non-factor pretty much. Kyle Lowry, okay, I guess. Maxey and Embiid, kind of the same thing. It was another one of their shows. But at least you got Oubre and Cameron Payne as well. And I think that's kind of the difference between this game and last game, where you look at it and you're like, okay, last game it was more so just Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, but now everybody else is kind of showing up again, except, Tobias Harris. But overall, I think this is a tough game, but obviously a statement made by Philly for sure.
Like you can live with a little bit less from somebody like if Embiid gives you 50.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of and that's kind of the other factor, right? But in the third quarter was really where the momentum shifted, because that's where, like, again, that was where Cameron Payne's threes were falling, Embiid's threes were falling, as well as Maxey,
Yeah.
and others, right? Like that was really the big difference. And,
Yeah.
like, you're still not getting some things from certain guys, but like you got enough from your stars and a couple of the role players. And then again, you look over at the Knicks and like Hart was fine. Anunoby was better in this game offensively than in some of the other games. Hartenstein was good, but you didn't really get anything from DiVincenzo. And then, obviously Robinson got hurt, so you didn't really get his contributions either. And then you got, that was kind of the difference, is you really didn't get much out of your bench like you got in the first couple of games. But like you said, this was kind of one where you kind of assumed that it would swing back towards Philly. Because again, you're down 2-0. It's a must win. You're at home. So you kind of expect like a different level of focus. And even then, like in the first half, I didn't, know who was going to win the game. Like, I mean, the Knicks were up in the first half. So, you kind of were just wondering, like, all right, the third quarter is probably going to decide it. And that's basically what happened.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Then the last one, this was the exact opposite, I think, of the Knicks Sixers game.
Yes,
this one was Lakers Nuggets 1-0, and then the Nuggets ended up winning 112-105, which pushes the Nuggets to 3-0. Right? What is it? 11 straight? Well, yeah, 11 straight wins dating back to last year's playoffs, this year's regular season, as well as this year's playoffs or whatever. So, really, this was kind of an interesting game from the perspective of you were kind of wondering how LA would respond, right? They lost game 2 in, pretty tough fashion, where you were up for most of that game, right? And it looked like you were about to pull it off in Denver. And then you lost right at the end, kind of in a similar fashion to the last 10 straight losses. So you wondered how it was going to look, right? Were they going to come out, and kind of, I guess, play hard and kind of be like, all right, that was that game, but this is this game. We're at home, and we're going to show out and we're going to do what we can. Or were they going to kind of just like hang their heads and kind of disappear? And in the first quarter, right, like in the opening, stretch, right, it kind of looked like the first 2 games, right, where the Lakers get off to a fast start. They're playing defense, they're flying, they're getting out in transition, and Denver just looks, I don't know, kind of, sleepy-eyed out there,
Yeah.
Or for whatever reason, I don't know
like they
what
just
you would
woke
call
up.
it. Yeah, exactly. And then in the second quarter, right, then again, the Nuggets kind of quickly, kind of cut back into the lead, and it was only a 4-point game, at halftime. And that's where it was, you were kind of, if you're, the Lakers, that's where you're kind of worried, because it's like we had a pretty solid first quarter, not so great second quarter, right? So all that, and then it's a 2-point, it's basically a 2-possession game at halftime. And in the first half, right, it was basically LeBron, AD, and not much else. You did get some bench contributions. But then it's kind of canceled out because you really didn't get anything from your backcourt. Reeves had 22, but a lot of that was kind of when the game was over. I mean, he hit like some ridiculous garbage time shots that, of course, didn't go in during the earlier parts of the game. He was okay, I think, in the first half because, he hit, he got some drives, got the line. I think he probably had like, I don't know, 8 or 10 points maybe in the first half, something like that.
Yeah.
So he was okay. But then you still didn't really get anything out of, then D'Lo reverted back the worst version, right, where he had what 0 points, 0 for 7, 0 for 6 from three, um, and that's just not good enough, right? And then you look at Rui, 5 points, 2 rebounds, 1 assist, so he didn't really do anything. Again, you got some bench performances, but again, some of that was kind of when the game was basically decided already. Um, and then you look at the Nugget side, and that's kind of where it's rough because it was another game where Jamal Murray was 8 for 21, right? He had 22 points, 9 assists, which is good, right?
Yeah.
But wasn't as efficient. And even Jokic had 24, 15, and 9. But again, some of that was when the game was kind of already out of reach, right? Like he probably had, I don't know, maybe like 15, 17 ish, right? Like through a good chunk of the game. But Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr., right? That's really where the difference was. Aaron Gordon had 29 points, 15 rebounds, 5 offensive boards. He was kind of hurt. LeBron was kind of hurting the Lakers at different points where he was getting, backdoor cut by Gordon a ton. Obviously, Gordon was crashing the offensive glass, and that hurts as well, especially in those second units where he was just getting whatever he wanted. And that's really been the difference, kind of not the difference, but one of the differences in the series is again, whenever Jokic is off the floor, Nuggets are still scoring, right? Because they're defending well, so they're not getting killed by the Lakers offensively, and then they're getting offensive rebounds, right? So they're still getting second chances, extra opportunities, and that was happening even with the starters. Jokic got what 5 offensive boards himself. So they had what 14 offensive boards. Like that's a lot. I mean, that's insane. I mean, I think the Lakers ended up with 45 rebounds. Again, a lot of that was when the game was over, right? Like there was a stretch I think in the fourth, right, where the Nuggets went up, what was it, like 14, 15, something like that. And you could tell the game was over, right? Like basically guys had quit. They were getting booed at home, which is
Yeah.
just bad, right? You had the clip of D'Lo being away from the team huddle or whatever. Didn't look great. Looked like some guys kind of knew that this is probably going to be their last games in LA,
For sure.
right? We'll see what happens, but there was some quit in this team, and which is kind of disappointing, right? LeBron had 26 and 9. I don't think he played as well in this game personally as he did in, the first two games. Some of that I think was kind of when the game was over. I thought AD was pretty good, but again, it was another game where didn't really do much in the fourth quarter. Don't really know why, right? Did he just not get the ball? Were they just not running offense through him? Was it some of Denver's adjustments? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But it just kind of goes back to the first three games where it's like you're losing on the margins. And this was a game where, again, the Nuggets, didn't play amazing, but they definitely obviously played better than the first two games. They still shot awful from three, which is just kind of wild how they've won every game despite shooting worse from three than I mean the Lakers shot 5 of 27. But again, those were when the game was over. When it
Yeah.
was a competitive game, I think they made 1 3. And I think it was Rui, funny enough. So again, when you lose to a team this many times in similar-ish fashion, like I mean, that team is basically just better than you. I mean, at the end of the day, which we knew going into the series, right? Neither of us picked the Lakers to win this series. I think we both kind of assumed it would be a 5 game series, right?
Yeah.
Like, because I think we gave the Lakers a game because we assumed that there'd probably be a game where like the Nuggets just play bad and then the Lakers have like a really good game, maybe at home. But it's looking like another sweep again. Um, and that's kind of interesting because you do kind of wonder like where do you go from here if you're LA? Because it's like you didn't really get any closer than you did last year. Because I mean, again, last year was a sweep, except that was in the Western Conference Finals. This time it's the first round, so you could argue it's a step back. They did win
Oh,
more
for sure.
regular season games, and I think it's kind of tough to play them in the first round. But I think you kind of assume even if they got the other end of the bracket, you probably still lose to them anyways, right? Unless a team knocks them out before you play them. Um, and pretty much all the reasons that we said going into the series why we didn't really expect the Lakers to win at all pretty much have happened. The Nuggets role players have been better, and we know they're better. You just kind of hope that, the Lakers role guys would play better than they did because you got last year some really good games from Rui and Austin, but they just haven't been impactful this series really at all. I mean, Reeves, I think defensively has done a good job on Jamal Murray, but he just isn't giving you enough on the offensive end. I know he had 22, but a lot of that was just garbage time. Like the final score was not indicative of how this game went at all.
Yeah.
Like I mean, they were down. Like the game was when the crowd started booing. it was pretty early in the fourth. Like that was how the game went. Like, I mean, obviously the Lakers had the lead in the first half, but you knew like you knew like, hey, if you couldn't hold a 20-point lead in the third quarter, what the heck makes you think you're gonna hold a 4-point lead, at home? Like this was the worst game I think from them in these three games, which is just kind of wild. And then again, the same issues where it's like a lot of small lineups. Jackson Hayes didn't get any minutes at all, which not that he would necessarily help, but it is like at least somebody that can give you some semblance of size. It hurts to not have Vanderbilt or Wood because those are guys that can help you get boards. But again, like it doesn't really matter. So that's kind of the tough part where you kind of wonder what really happens after. It's like you assume that they're going to lose the next game and get swept, but it's like what do you do? What is your plan or goal in the offseason? Because we've heard a lot of rumors about them hunting for a star. Is that star going to be available? We don't know, right? And then it's like you kind of hope that some of these guys would have played well enough to kind of justify keeping some of them, but they haven't. So it's like, you know, what is your goal? Do you end up kind of blowing it up? I mean, like, I don't think LeBron and AD are going anywhere, but like, are you kind of like, gutting this group and kind of bringing in somebody else and kind of, rebuilding and bringing in another Laker roster, right? Like the one time that you kept a relatively similar roster, like you got swept again. So it's like, do you do that? Do you bring in a star? I don't know. But either way, I think it was kind of a lifeless game, from LA. And it kind of felt like a team that was starting to kind of just fall apart. We heard, the stuff about AD talking about like, we have stretches where we don't know what we're doing, right? And Ham was like, we'll just have to agree to disagree, or whatever it was. And then like you had a report that was talking about like that the Lakers organization was upset with AD's comments.
Hmm.
I mean,
I didn't hear about that one.
yeah, it was kind of reported before the game, I think, by Jared Greenberg. But just kind of an interesting scenario. And again, AD brought it. I mean, again, didn't do much in the fourth, but you can't really put the game on him. So it's just kind of weird. And Darvin Ham got booed. It like like when they introduced the starting five and the coaching staff, he got booed. It's just kind of wild. I don't feel like I've ever seen that before.
Me
I
neither.
mean, like it wasn't on the broadcast because you don't see that, at the start of the TNT game. But people who were at the game, they saw it. And then I guess if you watch the Spectrum, Sportsnet feed or whatever, you could have seen it. But just kind of just goes to show like there's a lot going on here that doesn't feel necessarily great. And I do kind of wonder, like, again, like you feel like LeBron and AD are going to go out swinging, but I just kind of wonder what the other guys kind of look like in this last game because it doesn't really matter because the series is over. But you know, I wonder like how many of these guys on this team have played their last game, for LA. It's like because again, there are some good players on this team, but you didn't get enough, right? Because that's the thing that's rough is that last year you felt like even though you didn't necessarily get enough from a ton of guys, ultimately your stars didn't really come through when you really needed them to. This time around, they've been pretty solid for the most part. Like, I mean,
Right.
they've again, like obviously, yeah, like in the fourth, like Jokic and Murray have been better, but I don't think you can say that like they've been badly outplayed like it was last year. Like it's relatively close. But this time around, you get nothing from anybody, even the guys that you got stuff out of last year. Like Rui, where are you? Like Austin Reeves, where are you? Like this is just kind of wild because again, like those guys were good for the against the Nuggets last year, but this year they've just been bad, and like that's kind of unfortunate because you know we've heard a lot about some of those guys being in trade rumors, and you know it didn't really seem like it affected them after the trade deadline because they weren't in danger of being traded, but they just haven't been good, and that's kind of the rough part if you're the Lakers, where it's like that's probably the series right there because like we said, if the Nuggets role players are going to outplay the Nuggets role players, that's pretty much wraps. Because you expect, Jokic and Murray to at least somewhat outplay LeBron and AD. I think you hope they keep it close, which they did. But if you're getting again, 20 points from Michael Porter Jr., 29 from Aaron Gordon. I mean,
Bless
that's
you.
wraps. Thank you. That's pretty much wraps. That's really the difference is that, and that's kind of what we expected. Like it sucks if you're, the Lakers because you thought that you got closer, but you really didn't. And like, it's kind of what we expected, to be honest. Just
Yeah.
kind of wild that in this type of game, it just was bad. But it kind of felt like last year's game three. Because I think in last year's game three, the Lakers were down big pretty early. The difference was Murray went nuts in that game, compared to this game. But I don't know, just kind of weird. Like, because even last year they never got booed. I mean, like,
Yeah.
but this time around, like, it was bad. Like, again, like, just from the opening tip, they were kind of happy, but like the fact that the coach gets booed early, and then obviously the whole team got booed relatively late. I mean, like, how often do you see that? Like, did the Celtics even get booed in game two? I guess it's a lot different from losing a game two, but it's a split versus just getting just punched
Yeah.
everywhere, in game three. So like it's not really a boo worthy moment, but like even Philly, like in the play in game 7-8, like your season isn't over, but like they were booing and like it's just kind of wild. Um,
Yeah.
but again, the LA crowd, you know, they're not gonna cheer on a team that plays like that. I mean, like they're
Heck
just not.
no.
That was kind of a team that looked like it just kind of quit. Like if I'm gonna be honest. I mean, I feel like you are you agree as well, but like it looked like a team that quit and is pretty much like ready for Cancun. Like not everybody looked like they were ready for Cancun, but you could tell some of them were. Like even LeBron, you could tell was just like, all right, these guys aren't doing anything, so whatever. Why do like like who cares at this point? You know what I mean?
Sure, yeah, and it's like I feel like a lot of people checked out. Especially at the end of the third, going into the fourth. That was, I think, the nail in the coffin. And if you want me to be
Yeah.
real, once Michael Porter Jr. started hitting step back mid ranges, like probably the lowest percentage shots that you could possibly conjure up, and he's hitting them over anybody and everybody.
Hmm.
That's when I knew, this series is probably over. But for the Lakers, it's so weird because I feel like they're one of the strongest like first half teams, first quarter teams, where it's like you can tell like they really wanted it. The pace was up. Feed your guys. That's how you should play basketball, in my opinion, especially come playoff time. But then they stray away from that. D'Lo not being a factor does not help at all on either ends of the floor, and I think he's probably gone. If you want me to be real. But yeah, and also like to go back to the point that AD was making, I 100% agree with him. After watching this game, like
Yeah.
minute by minute, you can clearly see there are issues between the coaching staff and the players for sure. Because and even like the players amongst themselves as well. Like LeBron gave up a lot of rebounds and like you said, a lot of backdoor cuts when he's guarding, Aaron Gordon. And it's funny, his body language is awkward too, because when he gives those up, it seems like he's almost looking for help from somewhere else. So I don't know if that's supposed to be on Rui or AD. I don't know, but like I guess we'll never know. To quote Kanye, but like with with the coaching staff, what's the game plan here? Because if you want me to be real, I thought the best thing that they did this entire series was putting LeBron on Jamal Murray to kind of hinder him and make him very uncomfortable, especially coming out of the pick and rolls and making him sweat for his buckets and making him feel the pressure of somebody who's taller and bigger than him. Because I don't think you have that in the guard room with Reeves and D'Lo. Obviously, like you said, Reeves has been very good in terms of making Jamal Murray uncomfortable as well. But in terms of leading into transition, I think LeBron has done a better job of slowing down Jamal Murray. But at the end of the day, that's the least of your worries when Aaron Gordon is scoring 30 points in one game. And like you said, I don't know where the Lakers go from here. This was a horrible second half, one of the worst ones I think I've seen in a long time, just around the league in general,
Yeah.
And I don't know, like I don't want to put a lot of blame on Braun because I think he did the best that he probably could, given the situation and what was going on at the time. And then AD, he was dominant, but I get it. Like you goes back to what I said about game two. You can't give a guy the ball, for the entire game. But at some point, you have to go to your guys in crunch time, and they just veered away from that. And even like guys that maybe weren't going, you got to try and get somebody going. Like obviously, if D'Lo's 0 for 7, it's probably not going to fall for the rest of the game. Maybe we look to Rui. A guy like Rui, I don't think should have only 4 shots in comparison to maybe his counterpart in a Michael Porter Jr. or Aaron Gordon, where they have 16, 18,
Yeah.
apiece.
But like,
It's
yeah.
annoying, but I get
But
they're
like
not the same caliber. I get it,
yeah.
and that's the problem. And I think now a lot of fans who were like kind of leaning towards LA, they're kind of realizing that Denver is in their own class at this point. That starting 5 is elite. We kind of knew this from the beginning of the season. And that's why we picked them to go back to back, because I think they're They've cooked up an unstoppable recipe where Jamal Murray can have a game like this, but then Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. can kind of carry the dead weight, along with Jokic having like one of those like games where it's not the best, but it's a quiet one, but it fills the stat sheet completely.
Yeah.
And we all know Jokic isn't really a factor on defense, so that's also another thing that is mind-boggling to me. You have Anthony Davis, and like you can't get one game, one. You can't win one. That's the crazy thing, And I know as a Laker fan, it's probably frustrating as like I don't know what like that.
Yeah,
that's insane to me, bro.
Especially again when it's not like in these 3 games they're getting horribly outplayed by
Exactly.
those guys. Like they limited Jamal Murray, for the most part compared to last year where he just was, unstoppable.
Right.
But then like you said, when you slow down Jamal Murray, then it's like, okay, now you're starting to give up stuff to like Aaron Gordon, or now you're starting to give up stuff to Michael Porter Jr. Like that's the rough part. And that's like you said, that's why the Nuggets are who they are in the sense of like they have an elite starting five. They don't have a lot of depth, but they have a very established identity. They play together, they play hard, they don't play scared. They're well coached and well prepared, clearly very disciplined, right? Which is, not what we're seeing on the on the other end from the other team. So that's kind of why they're tough to beat. And again, like, even with the Lakers personnel, again, it's like we talked about where there's a lot of teams that the Lakers have a size and physicality advantage over, but not this team,
Right.
right? Like, this is why, if they're playing some other team, that's smaller, like in Oklahoma City, or, even a team like the Clippers, who does have, a couple of bigs, but they're not Jokic. And then obviously their fours are not the same either. They don't have an Aaron Gordon, or even some other teams, like Golden State or whatever. But against this team, it's a bridge too far because it's just like you don't really have an additional guy, outside of LeBron and AD that can really help you, because like even like a Rui, can sometimes help defensively and on the boards, but not all the time. And that's not really like his style of play. You know what I
No,
mean? Like it's
never
just,
has been.
yeah, he's more of like an offensive oriented guy. And so, not having, like a playable big next to LeBron and AD also kind of hurts because it's like in those second units where it's Aaron Gordon at the 5, you're trying to counter that by having LeBron and Rui, at the 5, and that's just not going to work because those guys don't really do the same type of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then like next to LeBron and Rui is like 3 guards, so like that also doesn't help either, right? It's like Gabe Vincent, Spencer Dinwiddie, and Torian Prince. So it's like not only are you small, you don't really have any resistance in the other spots either. And like that's kind of rough. Like you don't have rebounding, you don't have rim protection with that group. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Like I know that's I guess how Darvin Ham likes to do his lineups, but then it's also like again, who else are you putting out there? Like, if it's not Jackson Hayes, like you don't have another big. You're not putting Colin Castleton out there, and I don't even think you can because he's a 2-way guy. He's not even a draft pick.
Yeah. They messed up. They let go of all those bigs. That was, I think, the beginning of the downfall of like the current Lakers, like as they're currently constructed. Because like even Dwight Howard's been coming out recently, although credibility is questionable there. But like with Dwight, like that he was a stopper. You're not saying like that he's gonna like completely take Jokic out of the game, but he's at least gonna like make him feel something.
Just another, it's just another option to have so that
alongside
way
AD.
So that way you don't have to have AD guard him the whole game. Because like in game 2, which we didn't even mention, right? Like AD got into foul trouble in the second half, and like he had like 5 fouls in the fourth quarter at one point.
Yeah.
So then it's like Jokic is going to get free and be able to score because AD can't do much, or else he's going to foul out of the game, and then you don't have another secondary guy. So that's like you said. That's because when they beat the Nuggets, because that's the last team that beat the Jokic Murray Nuggets. It's a different roster because the role players were different. Because there was no KCP or Aaron Gordon, but like that was the last team to beat them. I know like the Warriors people online were like, "We're the last team to beat them," and it was like, yeah, technically, but like there was no Jamal Murray or Michael Porter Jr.
For sure.
But either way, like when they beat them that year, obviously LeBron and AD were better, right? Like I mean, because that was 4 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
But you also had more additional size everywhere. Like you know what I mean? Like your guards were big, your wings were big, your bigs were big. Like I mean, that was kind of the difference there. And it's like obviously like AD at the center is fine, but like, does he have to play center for 48 minutes or however many minutes he played? Like, I mean, ideally against the Nuggets, probably not. And then obviously, like if he's off the floor, you definitely want a center. I just don't like the idea of having LeBron and Rui as your 4 and 5. We saw that last year in the playoffs, and it didn't really work at all, right? Because they didn't
Right.
have a backup big last year because they had what was it, Wenyan Gabriel, um, who didn't even really play in the playoffs. I guess they had Tristan Thompson, who they just randomly put there in I think the last game of the playoffs or whatever, and then Mo Bamba was hurt, so they didn't really have another big, and that's kind of an issue. It's not the only issue because I think not having a guard that can attack the rim consistently doesn't really help either because it's like D'Lo's a perimeter oriented guy. Reeves can kind of attack, but he still is more like a stops in the paint and then kind of spins and pulls up or hits a
Yeah.
bank shot. He's not really like a guy that's going to blow by somebody and kind of finish around the rim. He's a good finisher, but it's not the same type of play as some other guards around the league.
Yeah.
Um, so
Lakers
that's
like to
rough.
settle too. That's another thing I've noticed. They like to settle for some horrible
That's
shots
the
or some trifling threes, which is why they
that's the
shot 18%.
Yeah, that's the undisciplined nature that I was talking about, where it's like again in game two, a Torian Prince step back three in a tight game in the fourth quarter, where it's like you really need to kind of create some good offensive possessions. That doesn't happen with the Nuggets, right? Or like in this game, I think it was like Rui. He didn't even catch the ball clean in the corner and just kind of just fires a contested three.
D'Lo
And
did it a few times too.
yeah,
Like
D'Lo did.
him taking deep threes. And then I
Yeah,
noticed like one thing that he is good at, I'll give him the credit, like he's one of those guys that can kind of like catch in the shooting motion. Like, he kind of like catches it at the pinnacle and then kind of
right.
just flings it. But if you're
Yep.
cold, bro, it's not going in. Like, let's be real.
And I think that's kind of the other part because, like, he played only 24 minutes. And it's like, you almost didn't even really notice he was out there. And you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, I
yeah.
mean, he was out there, but like, I guess you noticed when he missed, but like,
Which is
I
not good.
almost didn't even realize he played 24 minutes or whatever. But that's the tough part because, like, he was unplayable in this game. And the issue is that if he's not playing well, you don't really have a good chance to win unless you have a monster game from LeBron and AD. But that's too much, I think, to ask of those two guys when you don't really have another great. And again, that part of that is the age factor as well with those guys, right? Because LeBron's 39 and AD's 31. It's not old, obviously, right?
Yeah,
But it's not like he's 27 anymore.
yeah.
Um, and when your only other options at the guard spot is Gabe Vincent and Spencer Dinwiddie, and Gabe's kind of been a shell of himself, and
Yeah, he's been
Dinwiddie just
horrible.
yeah, and then Dinwiddie just really hasn't been good. Like that's that hurts because like D'Lo's your third best player essentially this season, and when your third best player has a stinky game like that, it's kind of hard to win. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, for
especially
sure.
when you're not much from anyone else. Like again, Reeves at 22. I don't care what that says. Like a lot of that was like just fake stuff at the end. You know what I mean? I don't
100%.
know. Yeah, like I said, I don't remember how many points he actually had when it mattered. It was like I said, it's probably like 10ish or something like that. But like, come on, like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean?
Yeah, we got to be real. I think people are finally waking up to realize how good Denver is. And yeah, welcome to the party because they're unstoppable at this point.
Right, and it's kind of the wild part because I remember like last year we didn't even pick them to win the title at all.
No.
Um, but then we didn't even expect them to win against the Lakers last
Nope.
year. But then it's like, oh wow, they had only lost a couple of games in the playoffs up to that point, and it's like now they're here. That's kind of the wild part because I think with the injuries to Jamal Murray, it kind of made people forget, that team was already really good.
Yeah.
Because in the bubble, right, they were in the conference finals. Yeah, they got smashed in five, but it kind of felt like they were on an upward trajectory because they had been in the playoffs before that, anyways.
Yeah.
And then it was kind of just taken away for a couple of seasons. Now they're healthy again. Their stars are also better than they were at that point, and they have better role players. Because again, like Caldwell Pope is a better starting two guard than what the Nuggets had before they had him. Right? It was like Will Barton, or other random guards. And then
Didn't they
like
have
Aaron
Gary
Gordon.
Harris at one point or something?
Yeah, Gary Harris, I think, was the starting guard before. And then like Aaron Gordon is just a way better player than who they had at the four before, right? It was like Jeff Green one year. I think it was like Paul Millsap and Jeremy
Yeah.
Grant at one point.
Yeah.
So like that's kind of the difference. Is like those two guys defensively have really elevated them because before they were like an offensive oriented team. Like they could score but couldn't really defend like that. But now they can do both. And it's like, even Jokic defensively, I know, like you mentioned, he's not known for his defense, but he has become much better defensively than he was, previously in his
Using
career,
his
right?
body to get stops for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And like, yeah, like AD, will take it to him. But like that's AD, like he can do stuff like that.
And
But
that's
then
why
it's
I'm
like,
like, you need to win at least one game, bro. You have Anthony Davis. It is hard, but it's not that hard. Just game plan. Like I
yeah,
feel like there
exactly.
isn't a game plan, and that's the problem. You can clearly see
Right.
it.
And that's the tough part because, like you said, this is not like AD last year where it's like, one game he'd be really good and then another game he would kind of not play that well. He's played consistently well, throughout this entire series. Like, yeah, in the fourth, he's disappeared. And that's like you said, the game plan is just wild because, like, it's like what we talked about with the Nuggets. There is no way that Jamal Murray or Jokic is going to get one shot attempt in the fourth quarter. Like, Michael Malone is not going to let that happen. He's just not. And, like, honestly, the players aren't going to let that happen either, I don't think. Like,
No,
so, like you said, it just kind of comes from, and again, remember earlier in the season, we were hearing stories about, like, how Laker players were not all that happy with what Ham was doing earlier in the year, where it seemed like he kind of lost the trust of a lot of the guys in the locker room, where we didn't really hear that at all last year, right?
right,
Like, it
right.
sounded like last year, a lot of guys were kind of happy to play, for him or whatever. And it hasn't felt like that, this year at all. And like, some of that goes back to what he was doing earlier in the season with what he did where he was starting, like Torian Prince or like Cam Reddish. And like some of that, I guess, at the time was quote unquote defensible because guys were playing poorly. But it's like you just don't normally necessarily always see that like from other teams. Like, even Clay Thompson was benched, at one point, this season, and that's a guy that's a Hall of Famer. But at the same time, like, I don't know, you just don't necessarily expect it, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of a weird thing.
Yeah,
But, it just what have we learned from this series, right? Like, have we really learned anything? Like, we already know that the Nuggets are really good and that the Lakers are a bad matchup, but like, what have we truly learned? I think, like you said, people are probably waking up to now that the Nuggets are being good. Because even a guy like the Homelander, right? He mentioned that like after he saw the Nuggets in game one, he was like, yeah, you guys might be right about, Denver in terms of how good they are. And it's
yeah.
like, yeah, like, I mean, going back to last year's playoffs, they've only lost 4 games, right? Two to the Suns, one to Minnesota, one to Miami, right? They only lost one in Denver, right? And then they haven't lost any so far at all. I don't expect them to lose to LA. We'll see what happens when they go to the next round, and we'll talk about it when they get there. But yeah, like they're clearly poised, as the favorites again, right? Because like even in the East, I just don't trust any of the teams in the East. And then even in the West, right? Like there's a lot of really good teams, so maybe they could be had, by one of those other teams like Minnesota or Phoenix if they get out, maybe. But I don't know. I don't see it. I feel like it's going to be really tough to beat that team 4 out of 7 times. Clearly, they're not afraid when they're getting punched in the mouth. I mean, maybe that's just when they play LA, but like like when they're down, like they're not afraid of anybody. And I think that's, you know, that that's credit to the identity of the team and the coach, honestly. Like we have to give Michael Malone a lot of credit as well, just because of the fact that like, his identity seems, his personality seems kind of different, from say like Jokic, where Jokic seems like very, I don't know, mild mannered or whatever.
Quiet.
Yeah, like we know he's a killer.
Oh yeah, for
But like
sure.
just like in terms of his outward personality, he just seems kind of like just I don't know, like a mild mannered, laid back kind of guy. But then you look at Michael Malone, where he's like, he brings the energy. He always seems, very,
Reminds me of
whatever.
Red Hulk.
Yeah, exactly. So like, kind of the interesting thing is that again, he talked about the level of discipline as well. You just don't see a lot of wasted possessions with the Nuggets, which is why it's going to be tough to beat them because we know there's the other teams. There's stretches like we've seen with Phoenix. There's wasted possessions. We've seen at times with Minnesota. There's wasted possessions, or even a team like Oklahoma City. There's wasted possessions. Not as many, right? Because those teams are very very well coached. But like again, you're not seeing Aaron Gordon step back threes. Like he'll take threes from time to time if he's open,
Yeah.
but like, that's a lot different. And he's not going to take himself out of the game because again, we see him cut to the basket, crash for offensive boards. Everybody knows their role to a T, and that's kind of the beautiful thing about the Nuggets is that everybody in that starting five has a very specific role, and they pretty much fit it, perfectly, right? Like you have Michael Porter Jr. is kind of like the X factor, swing guy where he's, just catching jump shots, making a lot of tough shots, but not like a high usage player, right? Like he's not running the pick and roll. He's not scoring in isolation. It's a lot of handoffs. It's a lot of catch and shoots. Same with KCP. And then like, Murray's your scoring guard, right? Like, Jokic is the point guard and runs the offense, but Murray's the other guy. Like you said, they put a lot of trust and faith in to run the offense. Again, everybody's got good roles, even like the young guys. Like we've seen solid minutes from like a guy like a Christian Brown, or like a Peyton Watson,
Yeah.
at times. And that's kind of the other factor as well. Like when we talked about if Denver's bench outplays the other team, they're going to win. Like
Yeah.
because their bench, is just not quite the same, as another team, right? Like a team like New Orleans has Trey Murphy the third coming off the bench when Zion is healthy. But like for the Nuggets, again, it's like Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, guys that for most teams probably would be like a 10th, 11th man on the roster.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Like even like to talk about Peyton Watson. I think I can't remember what quarter it was in, but I know he got banged on. It was pretty bad by 80. Like he dunked all over him.
I want to say it was the second.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, and then like a few possessions later, he just swats. He's just back on the defensive end, and I think that's something that's very undervalued with Denver. And I feel like they've changed and revolutionized basketball. And maybe not revolutionized it, maybe more so like brought it back down to earth. Where it's like we're going back to team basketball, and I think that that's something that people have kind of forgotten. That it's not so much about like who has the best star; it's more so about who is the best team. And these guys, like they're so cohesive together. It's really insane. Like you said, they know their roles, and they also kind of elevate roles as well. Like Michael Porter Jr. could be like a corner guy easily for sure. But then in like the third or fourth quarter, he could come alive and start hitting step backs. Aaron Gordon too. Like normally you see him being a factor on defense and being the role guy and being a lob threat and stuff like that. But then sometimes, you see him crashing the O boards to the point where it's stifling in the paint, and it's like AD versus Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., and Jokic. Like, what can you do at that point? And with this series, I'm just questioning what the Lakers' game plan is on defense as well. I know we didn't really talk about that, but my God, like I get it. You want a game plan for Jamal Murray to the point where he's not a factor, or maybe he's not. Okay, I won't say not a factor, but to the point where he's inefficient, and you make him feel the heat. But like leaving people wide open is just not the way that you scheme defensively. And that goes for everybody in the playoffs. It's kind of been a thing and a trend that we've kind of been seeing. But for the Lakers, I think they do it the worst because they do it on twos, threes. They do it in the paint. Like,
and they're
it's
not
horrible.
And they're not going to get the rebound,
Exactly.
which is kind of the frustrating part because it's like, okay, if you're going to leave a guy wide open, you got to crash, you got to box out. You can't just like give up, an offensive board. And I know like if it's a three, it's going to be a long rebound, but just something about like leaving a guy wide open and then like not even attempting to get the defensive rebound just is kind of problematic, at least to me. Like maybe that's just
Yeah,
me.
I
Like I
feel
said, I
you.
understand rebounds and whatnot, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's been the scheme, pretty much all year, right? Where it's like, we're gonna give, I guess it's like
Oh
we're gonna
God.
try we're gonna try to keep guys away from the rim, but then as a result, like it opens up a lot of 3-point shots. Because I know when Vogel coached the team, right, it was the opposite, where it's like we're gonna chase guys off the 3-point line and funnel them to the rim and be like, okay, if you want to take it up into the paint against, AD, JaVale, Dwight Howard, and LeBron, be our guest. But
That's how
like
it
this
should
time around,
be.
yeah, this time around it's the opposite. And it's like, I don't know. And it's like even when they're small, like they still give up a lot of threes. And it's like the whole point of playing small, obviously you're gonna give up points, but like you would think it would be giving up points on the inside. Like I mean, they were in this game, but I've seen other teams where they go small and they just get lit up from three because their perimeter defenders just they don't have a lot. It's really you don't have enough two-way players. I think that's kind of the issue there, where it's like a lot of guys that kind of do one or the other, right? Where it's like Rui is gonna score for the most part, but isn't a great defender. And like sometimes he can be, but it kind of just depends. And then like Austin, right? Like he's more of an offensive guy, not really a defensive guy. He's played better defense as of late, but it's kind of come at the cost of his offense. And then
Hmm.
obviously we know with D'Lo, kind of a similar thing where he's like mainly an offensive guy. If his offense isn't going, he's not going to help you. And then even like a Vanderbilt, if he was healthy, he wouldn't help you on the offensive end at all, right? In fact, he might make your offense worse. I guess he could give you some offensive rebounds, right? But he can't really shoot, doesn't really space the floor, not even like a great finisher. But he could help you on the boards, and I guess that's kind of again, if you're gonna give up, you can't give up offensive rebounds and turn the ball over. That's just crucial. I mean, that's just, awful. Like, that's
Yeah.
the issue. And, like, even in this game, like, when you look at the turnover battle, the Lakers technically had, they had less turnovers in this game
Hmm.
than the Nuggets, right? Which wasn't the case at all. But they gave up so many offensive rebounds
Yeah.
and had a bad offensive game. I kind of felt like going into this game, it was probably going to be a blowout, where it's like
Yeah.
the first two games were, I know the Nuggets won by double digits in the first game, but it was like a competitive game.
Yeah.
And then the second game obviously was down to the wire. And then it was like, okay, the Nuggets didn't play that great the first two games. They're probably going to play really well in this game and put their foot on the gas, right? Like, send a message and be like, your guys you're not going to do anything, right? We've beaten you before. We're going to do it again. We're not going to waste, time and kind of like play around. We're going to end this series, right? Like the Lakers
Yeah.
threw a punch in the first quarter and the Nuggets punched right back. And that's kind of been the case for the last, 2 seasons, to be honest. But like we said, we expected this
Yeah.
where the Nuggets are going to win. I think it's disappointing that, like you said, with the way that AD has played, you couldn't get one because
One,
it wasn't,
bro.
like you said, it wasn't because, like I said, it wasn't the case last year where he was great in every game. But in this series, he's been really good.
Yeah.
Again, he's not getting punked or badly outplayed by Jokic, right?
They've
Like
been
he's playing,
even.
yeah, he's playing really well on both ends of the floor. But when you don't have enough from your other guys, that's unfortunately probably what's going to happen because we know at least two of the Nugget starters, maybe three, are probably going to play very well every game, depending on the matchup, right?
Yeah.
Like, Jokic and Murray are going to play pretty well, and Murray hasn't even been that crazy in this series, which is kind
No.
of the wild
LeBron
thing.
has outplayed him except for this game, I think, personally.
Right. And then, again, like Jokic has had some good games, right? But like there were some games against the Lakers in last year's series. I think he averaged like 30 a game. And even had like at 40, I think, in a game. Like, I mean, he's been good. He's been
Yeah.
really good. But he hasn't crushed them as badly as there's no Sombor shuffle shot clock threes.
Right.
It's a lot more, paint work this time. He's hit some threes, but he hasn't burned them from the perimeter like he did, last year at times. Which is kind of wild. But this time around, Michael Porter Jr., it's
Yeah.
kind of doing that other stuff. So
It's
that's
crazy,
kind of the
bro.
weird thing with these playoffs is that, like, you know, a lot of times, you kind of see, like what a team really is, in terms of the matchups where it's like, again, with the Nuggets, they haven't played great in any of these games. Like, I guess they were good in this game, but we know they can be better. And like, that's the scary part. Cause like, what if there's a game like in the next round where like, again, we see like a 35 point, Jokic or 35-point Jamal Murray game where both of them just kind of cook. Cause it's going to happen at some point. Like, it
Hmm.
just is. Like, like at this point, the Nuggets kind of feel like Thanos. That's kind of,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the funny thing about the playoffs is we're talking about all of this, but I think we both expect at the end of it, the Nuggets are going to hold up the trophy again. And that kind of opens up another, like, round of conversations. We're not there
Sure.
yet, obviously, but,
Sure.
it's going to be interesting to see, if the Nuggets pull this off, and win back to back, that's going to do a lot, I think, for the guys on the team. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
heck yeah, yeah, for their legacies and all that stuff, for sure. And, considering who they're going to be playing against, honestly, like, if you want me to be real, and it's crazy that we're using all these Marvel analogies, but I think Jokic has solidified himself in LeBron's Sinister Six at this point. Like, this is crazy. I've never seen somebody really not have a response, and I'm not singling out LeBron, I'm talking about like the Lakers. They don't really have a response for anything that the Nuggets do, and really specifically Jokic, because I think there is a way that you could probably plug the pick and roll, but there is no help defense. Okay, maybe too much help defense at times, and sometimes there isn't, which is the funny thing. Like when they leave each other and they try and like do island stuff and try and like out IQ Jokic, it fires back so badly. It's like almost shooting yourself in the foot twice. It
Yeah.
makes no sense. And when you
Shock.
overcommit to Jokic, like, or even like if you overcommit to Jamal Murray, the awkward part
Right.
is Gordon's gonna be there for the rebound, and
Exactly.
LeBron is not paying attention, or whoever's
Right.
on Gordon is not paying attention. They're checked out, no
Yeah.
communication whatsoever, and Gordon's got there for the tip, or
Yeah.
Porter's open on the corner, elbow normally. KCP is probably taking a fading three. Then it's another O board. It's like, here we go again. It doesn't
Yep.
make sense. I don't know how, and like you said, it's a personnel thing for sure. But I think there is an answer somewhere out there.
But they don't have it.
but
They don't
they
have it.
don't have it. Like, if you want me to be real, I think the team that probably would have it is between the Clippers or Minnesota. Honestly,
Yeah.
personnel wise, just based on like how the NBA meta is looking right now, size is
Yeah.
everything, and I think Minnesota's got it with the rebounding. Obviously,
Yeah.
Clippers as well. They're a great rebounding team. They have some guys that can shut down the X factors. Because I think if you take away the X factors of Denver, I think you have a better chance at probably just pulling off one or two games. You know,
If everybody for the ideal Nuggets game is that everybody plays well and
for sure.
Jokic doesn't have like 40, 50 points, right?
Right.
If he has like, 28, 13, and like 10, that's kind of like the perfect game for him and like the perfect game for the Nuggets because that probably means that everybody else is contributing and playing at a high level. And like you said, it's probably the Clippers and Minnesota because I think, the issue with Phoenix is I don't necessarily trust like the execution
Yeah.
necessarily. But then it's like with Minnesota, it's like we know they have the size and the defense, but are they going to be able to offensively execute? Because they've been kind of a weird offensive team
Sure.
this year. It's been good in the first two games, but that's against the Suns, right? Like, does it look like that against the Nuggets? I don't know. And then like with the Clippers, they're probably going to be able to do much better offensively. I'm just curious if they're going to be able to slow down, the Nuggets defensively because they've been, because their defense was not very good, during the latter part of the season, but it was elite,
Yeah.
for a while. And, like that's kind of the thing with the Clippers is that like if Kawhi is healthy, that's the other factor. Because do we trust that he's going to be able to stay healthy? Because personally, I don't. I
Right.
mean, I would hope he would get better over the course of the postseason, but usually it kind of just you know drops off, right? Because like even last year, like when we saw the Lakers, right, like they were gassed by the Western Conference Finals, like they had nothing left, obviously, and then like even Miami, like by the time they were playing the Nuggets, they fought, they played hard, but they didn't have it, they didn't have enough, and that's kind of the tough part is like you have to be able to do both, like you have to be able to slow down the Nuggets offensively and then you have to kind of be able to hang with them, on the other end, right? Like you got to like you have to be able to score with them and slow them down. I don't know if there's like a team that can truly slow them down. I think like you said Minnesota's probably the best bet. But then like I said I don't trust them, on the other end offensively. So we'll see, but and again, if they get out of the West like relatively handedly. Like if they lose like 3 games going into the finals, like hats off to them because like this is like a ridiculous Western Conference because it's not like the Lakers are a terrible team. Like they won almost 50 games. They're not good enough to beat the Nuggets, but like if you just come out of the West and you beat all these 50+ win teams and like yeah, and then you kind of steamroll your way into the finals, like hats off. Like that's impressive.
Yeah, for
Because this
sure.
is like the strongest I think that the NBA's been in probably a while, right? Probably ever, honestly. Because I mean, again, we got teams in the West at least that didn't even make the playoffs that won almost 50 games, like
Yeah.
all the way down to the 10 seed.
Yeah, it's insane. But the way that these series have gone, I mean, it's been so exciting. I think this one has been probably the most gut wrenchingly painful to watch, even just like as an NBA fan, because I don't think you want to see Braun go out this sad and this bad. Also, like I've been saying the entire time, is like when you have AD popping off like this and averaging like 30 plus points per game in the series and not really doing too bad on defense as well. Like it's tough because they're giving it their all, but not
Changing,
everybody's there for sure. And like even
change,
around the league, like it's shaping up
changing
to
of
be amazing.
changing of the guard in a way, because we might have a scenario where there's like in it's round two, there's no LeBron, no Steph,
Yep.
no KD,
Yep.
no Harden,
Yep.
possibly not even Kawhi or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Like all those guys could be gone. By round two. We'll see, right?
Yeah.
But if that's the case, like it's kind of a changing of the guard where it's like, all these other younger, up and coming teams are coming in and they're kind of showing like, yeah, we got it now, right?
For
Like you
sure.
guys might have had it, the last few years, but we have it this time around.
For
I think
sure.
that's going to be interesting to see, this play out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then in terms of news, rumors, the Hornets are interested in JJ Redick. Shams, reports that he is a serious candidate to become the team's next head coach. I don't know who Charlotte should hire. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously, it's like there've been a couple of coaches, right, that have been what was it, Jordy Fernandez. who was a Kings assistant, right? He's headed to Brooklyn. Um, and obviously the Hornets have an open, spot at the coaching position. I think there's going to be some other teams relatively soon that will have, open spots. We will see. But it's funny, right? Because he doesn't have, any formal coaching experience, right? But obviously he's got the podcast, right? He, has, he's been on TV, right? Obviously we've seen him break down, the X's and O's in film, right? Multiple times. So I'd be kind of interesting to see. It would be interesting to see what it would look like, from a coaching perspective. And it's also kind of an interesting first start because you're like, if he got the job, he'd be headed to a team in Charlotte that's kind of been in flux, where it's like where it's like not been a lot of great leadership, not a lot of maturity, you know, some talent, right? But kind of like but also some disappointments. So that'd be kind of an interesting like first gig to have. So I'm curious to see who will get it because there's been a lot of rumors, from other people as well. But who knows?
Yeah, and it's like that job, coaching the Hornets, I think is going to be probably like one of the biggest career moves that a person can possibly make because I think that roster has a potential, like an untapped potential that we kind of saw glimpses of when they were a playing team. But like, you know, once like once they get it together, I think they're going to be a force in the East, especially considering like how the tide is kind of turning in the East as of right now. Because I think there's going to be a couple of spots that'll open up, especially in the play-in. So I think whoever takes that job is going to like flourish in it. And I think JJ Redick would be an interesting one because I think if you hear him talk and you listen to what he does actually say, like you can really tell that he knows the game of basketball. Beyond just an X and O's aspect of it, I think him also having the playing experience is awesome. I think players who turn coaches are very intriguing. I'd love to see like a Rondo in this kind of position as well. Like same with JJ Redick, as being like a candidate, but obviously Rondo has some other things going on. But with JJ, I think there's a lot of potential for this move, and I actually like it a lot.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. It'd be interesting, like like say like for New Orleans, like if Rondo, is the head coach, and replaces Willie Green, and he makes Trey Murphy the focal point of the offense, as described on
Oh
the his podcast with with Bookie Cousins, right? I think it was Cousins that said that,
yeah,
or whatever.
that was funny.
Um, yeah, but also, in additional news, right, we got some, official awards, right, doled out. We had Six Man of the Year, we had Most Improved, and we also had the Clutch Player of the Year award, right? So, Most Improved was Tyrese Maxey, which we expected, right? He wasn't my pick, but he did get
Yeah.
it, and he did have a really good season. I guess what are your thoughts on that one? I guess.
I mean, it's cool, but like at the same time, I think the Bulls got the shaft. Like, and I'm just being real here. I think they got the
We'll
shaft
get
on both of these awards.
yeah,
But
we'll get into them.
yeah,
Um,
but with most improved, I think Kobe White was by far the most improved player. Um, but I get it. Tyrese Maxey did his thing this season. They're still in the postseason. That's a huge deal. And I think it's better probably for the league if a player of a star caliber really does get that award because I think it kind of shows that the NBA progression system actually works.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the other finalists I think were Alfred Şengün and Kobe White. So
Yeah.
those guys did get it.
Yep.
And then Six Man of the Year was Nas Reed, right? Who kind of was under the radar, right? Because for a long time, like Malik Monk was kind of the
I
presumptive
thought he should have
favorite.
won it.
Yeah, I guess his injury may have probably prevented him from getting it. I don't know, like,
Mm.
because I don't really remember a lot of people saying like, "Oh yeah, Nas Reed should be Six Man of the Year." I feel like most people said Malik Monk. Maybe something changed. I don't know, but either way, like he's been good off the bench. There was a stretch where he started right because Towns was out. That doesn't matter, right? You just have to play more games off the bench. But either way, yeah, like it wasn't my pick either, but it's like it's not one that I'm mad about, right? I think the other finalists, who was the other person? I don't even remember. I think it was Bobby Portis, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it
yeah,
was.
like I didn't think he was gonna win it. So, um, and then Clutch Player of the Year, right?
Oh
That
god.
was Steph, right? He won it. The other finalists were DeRozan and Shea. SGA, I think, was the other one, which kind of surprised me because I remember like when we were talking about the clutch stats, right? Like I don't think we even mentioned him
No.
at all, right? Like I mean, I honestly, like he could have won it, like considering they won 50 whatever games, and obviously we know he had some great clutch moments. I don't know, like I don't know how the clutch player of the year is even like determined because I'm just like, okay, I get that he had like a ton of crunch time points, but like they weren't a great crunch time team
Mhm.
and they didn't even make the playoffs. I just kind of feel like, and part of the reason why they didn't make the playoffs was because, I mean, obviously they were, 10 and they could have gotten in, but like because they lost so many crunch time games, that's kind of why they were the 10 seed. And like if they had won a lot more of those, they wouldn't be 10. And so
Sure.
it's like kind of hard. And like I'm not trying to hate at all, right? Because obviously we've talked about like there are people that don't think he's clutch, and he is, but like I don't think he should have won this award. Like I know he was like my pick, but it was almost like by default. But like honestly, it probably should have been either DeRozan or SGA. But then it's like the Bulls didn't make the playoffs either. So then it's like, if that's the case, then give it to SGA. But like, I don't know. Like, I just don't really know how they determine who wins the award. Like, I guess they were just like, he scored more fourth quarter crunch time points than everybody, so he just automatically gets it. But then it's like, okay, fine, cool. Like, is he happy that he won the award? Like,
Yeah.
probably. But is he happy that he missed the playoffs? Like,
Yeah.
okay.
His demeanor was hilarious when they were interviewing him on TNT or whatever. But this is my problem. Like I thought DeRozan should have won this one. He led the NBA in fourth quarter and overtime points. He ranked second in clutch points. And he also led the NBA in clutch free throws, ranked second behind Curry in clutch field goals made. So I get it. But at the same time, bro, like, can we show love to like the other guys? I get it. Curry's decked out. And I think you can make a case easily for him to win this award. But at the same time, I think the Bulls, they kind of like I said, they got the shaft. I think it should have either been Kobe White to win MIP or DeRozan to win. They should have won one of these awards, I think, because their season, they turned it around. And I think at the end of the day, I felt better about the Chicago Bulls than I did the Warriors. Who would have thought I'd be saying that in 2024? But yeah, my God. They needed to win something, I thought. But it is what it is.
Would you have been okay like if SGA had won it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Yeah,
that I think that would be like I could understand that for sure because I pretty much like every game that I watched, I didn't watch every OKC game, but every game that I did watch that was close, he was turning up in the fourth quarter. Like he was their go-to. A bunch of and ones, gets to the line, the free throws, all that stuff. Like
yeah. Yeah, Fox won it last year,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, right? And like they
Mhm.
were, and like again, it's kind of like one of those classic things where it's like, how much does team success factor into like an individual award? And like for some awards, I feel like people will, like the media people or whatever will weigh it, and then other times they don't. Like it seems kind of inconsistent. I think that's kind of the issue that I really have with a lot of these awards, right? Because like your pick when the MVP was Shea, right? Because it was like, hey, they're the
Yeah.
one seed. He's averaging over 30 a game. And so it's like, how could he not be, the most valuable player? But then you might have somebody that's like, okay, well, this guy is like, say, like Luca, right? It's like they're a 5 seed, but then it's like, if you take Luca off that team, they might be one of the worst teams in the NBA.
Oh yeah, for
You know,
sure.
so it's like it's kind of hard, but like it doesn't seem like the criteria is consistent, and I think that's kind of the frustrating part. Like when you look at how a lot of these awards are doled out, like you know what I mean? Because like I don't understand how they award like the clutch player of the year. Like what is this? What is the criteria? Like I guess it's fourth quarter crunch time scoring, but like you said, you mentioned the DeRozan stats where it's like he's still like the most efficient and
Yeah.
also scored a ton, and like they won a lot of those games, right? Like then that's the other difference as well. Like I mean, I would think like the clutch player of the year award, like winning would be a factor. Like obviously,
Yeah.
like Boston, nobody's gonna get it because they don't go in crunch time games a lot anyways. But like you would just think like in a scenario where there's like, three guys up for the award, the one that's like wins the most crunch time games you would think would have the edge. But like you said, it could just be we want him to win the award. Who knows?
Bro, like the Warriors went 23-20 in the 43 clutch games apparently that Steph played in. And then Bulls, they went 24-16 in DeRozan's clutch games. And then like I'm even looking at Shea, like it looks like that he scored 112 points on 58% shooting from the field in the clutch despite only playing 107 total clutch minutes. Like I think the criteria is complete BS. It needs to be figured out. It needs to be kind of written out, I think. But the problem is, like you said, with a lot of these individual awards, you know, there is no written rule. It kind of just changes every year, and we just make up the criteria as we go. And it's not even really us. It's more so, you know, NBA media and the people who vote for these guys. But like, you know, that's why I really value the championship more, because it's all about basketball, and like it has nothing to do with votes. You either win or you lose, you know? So you're either getting the chip or you're not, bro. Like I'm sorry, like I just kind of get pissed off talking about MVP and stuff. Like even like LeBron, like bro, he should have a depoy, you know? That year with Marc Gasol winning the depoy is kind of crazy to me.
I
Just
think
saying.
he was second team all defense, I think, which is
Yeah.
like, you know, it'd be like if somebody won MVP and they were second or third team all NBA. Like that just
Right.
doesn't happen.
That's what
You
I'm
know,
saying,
it's like
bro.
yeah, it's like in 2K, like when they give, you know, like a finals MVP to like the losing team because it
Yeah,
wasn't
heck
like
no,
somebody
bro.
put up like because like the person on the losing team put up crazy stats. Like, come on, like you gotta award
Never
somebody.
happened.
Yeah,
Right.
it wouldn't. But yeah, so that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know, you know, your thoughts in the comments about, you know, all these different games and, you know, all these matchups, you know, and how all these series are probably going to go, who's going to win the chip, what you think of the awards and whatnot, you know, and again, watch out because obviously, you know, we know some of these teams are going to get eliminated pretty soon. So when that happens, we'll be doing the live streams right at the beginning and at the end of each of those series. Make sure to check out the Discord. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We appreciate all the support, and we'll see you Monday.